Chapter 2150 The Power That Comes from the Plane. Han-sun, I have heard your name before, but I certainly did not expect to see you here. The three-headed, six-armed statue stepped in front of the Bysema. The bird head in its center peered directly at Han Senator. It looked how a demon might, when staring at a defenseless baby in an abandoned stroller. To Han-sun and the others, the strength of the metal statues was awe-inspiring. They were completely surrounded. And of course, the dragonfly-like xenogeneics were still flying about. There were too many of the insects to count, which made the situation of Han-sen's team completely depressing. Who are you? Han-sen asked, looking up at the giant three-headed six-armed statue. My name is Klinsman of the Destroyed, the statue replied. As it spoke, the other statues stopped trying to attack. They merely stood where they were. I did not expect the Destroyed to be part of the Break Skies, Han-sun said coldly. Klinsman laughed and said, You are incorrect. The Destroyed are not a part of the Break Skies as you suggest. We are the royalty of the Break Skies. Those stupid giants were just slaves with a few drops of our blood in their systems. We are the real Break Skies. So this is the home of a deified Break Sky? Han-sun asked curiously. Klinsman laughed. I know you are merely stalling for time, but that is fine. The Destroyed control everything here. You cannot hope to run. After a brief pause, Klinsman continued on to say, This is the house of a deified Break Sky. And yes, it has been abandoned. The deified elite it once belonged to has long been missing. But the Break Sky dolls he left behind are enough for us to claim the entire metal world for ourselves. Those who are above the rank of marquises are not permitted entry. So our grip as rulers of this place is not challenged. This place will become the primary xenogeneic space of the Destroyed. And as for your place here, Klinsman turned his metal bird head to stare at each of them. If you people are willing to concede, the Destroyed will welcome you as members of Metal World's society. Klinsman, I'm afraid I don't quite share your optimism, Han-sun said thoughtfully. What do you mean? The woman's face, the face to the right of the bird head, turned toward him. Han-sun looked around and said, I have heard that before you came to this city, this place was already the site of a battle. So what? Of course there was once a fight. Otherwise, why would it be a ruin? The woman said. Han-sun laughed and said, Metal World's power is strong enough that outsiders cannot break through, and only marquises can be sent in to do research. That means the powers from the outside are unable to affect this place. But if that is so, why was there a fight dangerous enough to force a deified elite to abandon this place? Klinsman frowned. The man's face of the statue then spoke instead. Perhaps the attacker broke through the power of Metal World and forced himself in? The same power that prohibited 5 of our elites from breaking through? If that deified elite did force his way through, do you really think the Break Skies could have escaped a being like that? And even if they ran, why would that elite take over Metal World and not lay a lasting claim on the place? Han-sun went on to say, What do you mean? The woman asked again. If my assumptions are correct, the Break Skies didn't abandon this place because of enemies from beyond. Their greatest threat must have come from the planet itself. What are you trying to say? The statue next to Klinsman looked annoyed. Han-sun laughed and said, The power that threatened the Break Skies, if it came from the planet, focused only on you. I doubt that it threatened anyone other than the Break Skies. If I were you, I wouldn't be so cocky. I might be thinking about running as far away as possible, actually. There is a high chance that you'll be killed well before us. Nonsense. If there was a power like that, it would be long gone. If it exists, then why hasn't it shown up? Han-sun, I admire your intelligence. I do not want to kill you. I am throwing you one last lifeline here. Concede, and I will stay my cruelty. The bird head smiled grimly. Han-sun did not speak again. He merely focused on how he might get out of the situation they were in. The things he was telling Klinsman weren't all a bluff. If the power that wiped out of the Break Skies truly did come from the planet, it wouldn't be extinguished so easily. After all the years that had passed, that power might still exist somewhere. If you truly seek death, then I will grant your wish. Klinsman commanded a dozen Break Sky statues to attack the Bycerna. The Break Sky dolls launched a variety of terrifying powers, which converged on the demon bug Bysema. The blue Bysema trembled, and it looked ready to buckle and break. Hansen thought things were pretty dire. Each Break Sky doll had king-class power. If Han Sun shrank the demon bug by Sima to shield just himself, its strength would be concentrated enough to withstand the force of his aggressors. Even if 10 kings attacked him, they'd be unable to penetrate its defense. But now, Han Sun had his demon bug by Sima stretched to shield 100 Sky Palace students, and the demon, Buddha, and dragon as well. The defense was stretched thin, and thus it was weakened. It couldn't protect them from a constant stream of attacks from a dozen dolls. Read latest chapters at List Novel. Seeing the by Sima quiver, they all knew it was going to break soon. And Hansen also knew they'd have to run. They couldn't stay where they were. Even if he kicked out the demon, Buddha, and dragon, the demon bug by Sima likely wouldn't be enough to keep the 100 marquises safe either. Han Sun, let us out. Perhaps some can survive that way, Dragon 8 shouted, knowing that the by Sima was about to break. Ba, we have to fight, a Buddha Marquis said. Khan frowned. His face kept flickering through a cycle of different emotions. He knew their situation was dire. Hansen wished to say something, but just as he was about to speak, the earth began to shake like a huge earthquake was underway. And then, an enormous sinkhole opened in the city. The metal surface caved in, falling into the seemingly bottomless hole. The sound of explosions echoed up out of the hole, signaling that something big was coming. All of the Break Sky dolls stopped attacking Han Sun and turned their attention to the bottomless pit. The dragonfly xenogeniacs all buzzed away. They flew straight out of the city, jostling each other in their panic. If there was a power that was able to force the deified Break Sky to abandon the planet, it would probably kill anything in its path. No way. I was right. Han Sun smiled wryly. The Break Sky dolls that were commanded by Klinsmann all took a step back. They peered at the giant hole. Chapter 2151 One Bite. One child sponsored content. They waited a while, but nothing rushed out of the pit. And gradually, the sounds of explosions became less and less frequent. As everyone was still staring in confusion, their eyes drifted to the side of the pit. A small white paw with metal claws had risen just over the edge. The claws looked ferociously sharp, but the paw was only the size of a baby's hand though. The small paw felt around for a grip on some surface. When it grasped the ground and started hauling itself up, a white metal face became visible. Its eyes were circular, and the skin looked like the skin of a lotus. When it emerged fully from the pit, everyone was able to get a good look at it. The little white beast looked sort of similar to a pangolin. With the tail included, it probably wasn't more than a meter long. Compared to the metal statues around it, the white metal beast looked like an ant. After the little beast pulled itself onto the surface, its chubby body waddled toward them. It was not fast though, and its tail and its butt shook like a baby's bottom. Han Sun looked at the beast with visible confusion. It might have looked like a pangolin, but it wasn't exactly like a pangolin. Han Sun thought of a creature that looked even more similar to it. Metal Eater. Han Sun remembered the Metal Eater he once adopted. This creature was a little smaller than the Metal Eater he had befriended, but other than that, it looked incredibly similar. Considering that this planet is formed wholly of metal, this might indeed be a Metal Eater. But that being said, its size suggests that it is a baby. Perhaps there is an adult one hiding in the cave? Han Sun thought with worry. Sponsored content. Although this creature might not have been the exact same species as the one Han Sun had encountered in the sanctuaries, it was definitely the same type. The metal critter seemed quite confident as it waddled its way toward the feet of one of the metal statues. Grab it! Klinsmann barked to his fellow metal statues. He was thinking similar thoughts to Han Sun. If the beast was the child of something far more dangerous lurking elsewhere, he wanted to capture it immediately. Doing so might prove useful. The destroyed that controlled the nearest metal statue heard Klinsmann's order. He immediately moved the statue to pick up the little beast. That beast was small and slow. The giant statue looked like it would have difficulty picking up the little creature without pulverizing it. As the enormous hand came down to grab the creature, it stared up at the hand helplessly. But before the big hand landed, the critter opened its mouth. At that moment, everyone's eyes opened wide. Even Hansen's. He had seen many scary creatures in his lifetime, and he had seen many animals devour others, but he had never seen a creature behave like this. The little thing was so small, but when it opened its mouth, the head became extremely large. The entire creature turned into a gigantic metal mouth. Its throat looked like a dark abyss. The statue was a few hundred meters tall, but the tiny creature ate the statue in a single bite. The sight was incredibly disturbing. It was more shocking than an ant eating an elephant. But it happened with no applause or fanfare. That metal statue vanished into the mouth, taking its destroyed pilot along with it. Sponsored content: one bite. It was just one bite. The little metal fiend swallowed and burped happily, and nasty chills started to run down the spines of everyone assembled there. Even the destroyed that were controlling the metal statues for Klinsmann were rattled. The little beast licked its lips with a long tongue, then looked at another of the metal statues that were near it. It jumped forward. "Kill it," Klinsmann shouted. He controlled a statue with 3 heads and 6 arms, and he used it to unleash 3 different lights to attack the metal fiend. The other metal statues also moved to attack the creature. Waves of fire and ice came shooting out of the metal statues to repel the beast. The little creature's body was suddenly wrapped up in a transparent shield. The shield intercepted the oncoming attacks and completely nullified them. They didn't even rattle the transparent shield. In a flurry of sparks, their attempted attacks fizzled away. Metal Eater. It is a Metal Eater. When Han-sun saw that shield, he received the final confirmation he needed that this creature was a Metal Eater. The powers they possessed were way too similar. The Metal Eaters from the sanctuary could produce shields just like that. While the shield of Han-sun's Metal Eater had been much weaker, the similarities between the two were obvious. Catcha. Sponsored content: the little beast ran toward the nearest metal statue, and its originally amusing waddle had now become quite sinister. Again, it opened its mouth and swallowed the entire metal statue before the destroyed inside had a chance to flee. It was difficult to imagine how a beast so small could swallow a metal statue that was the size of a mountain. All the marquises watched in terror. The metal statues had king-class strength, but they were getting swallowed one at a time. Despite the critter's small stature, it had to be deified. "Run!" Han-sun shouted as he switched off his Bysema. All the marquises rushed to escape the city. In front of a creature like that, the marquises didn't stand a snowball's chance in hell. Their only option was to run. Few humans would pay enough attention to kill an ant deliberately. Hopefully, the beast was only interested in the Break Sky doll, not smaller creatures. It was the marquis's only chance of getting away. Han-sun kept running, looking over his shoulder as he went. The little beast's body was protected by its shield again. It was traveling between the metal statues. The statues disappeared one after another. It made Han-sun think, one bite, one child. Although those metal statues were as big as mountains, before the metallic creature, they were like children. One bite really was enough to end any of them. Han-sun was merely hoping that the metal beast was not interested in beings as small and weak as the members of his team. If it did have a taste for them, it was game over. Their only hope was that the Metal Eater would stay occupied with the statues. Klinsmann and the others were in shock. They had now realized that what Han-sun had said was true. The deified Break Sky might really have been afraid of this being. If it was able to scare off a deified elite, who knew what abilities the little creature truly held? Without hesitation, Klinsmann turned around and started to run away. He also called on the destroyed to do the same. But it was too late. The little critter one bite, one child didn't take long to finish up the rest of the statues. Chapter 2152 Disastrous Luck. Sponsored content. Klinsmann was very smart. He hastily removed himself from the Break Sky doll to ensure his own survival when the construct was swallowed. But when Klinsmann was still in the air, the little beast's tongue flew out and snared Klinsmann, then jerked him back into its mouth. Klinsmann didn't even have a chance to scream. Han-sun had thought the Break Sky dolls would stall the metal beast, buying the marquises enough time to escape from the metal city. When he looked back, though, he saw that all of them had already been destroyed. Han-sun became particularly glum when he noticed that the metal beast was now coming after them. The body of the critter was quite chubby, and it had originally looked like some sort of modern art sculpture forged of metal. Not now though. Now it looked like a demon that wanted their blood. Seeing it head their way, everyone felt a huge chill run down their spines. "Spread out and scatter," Khan shouted, before turning to flee in a different direction. The other races also realized that splitting up was their best option. They had to escape, but if they all ran together, the beast could swallow all of them in a single bite. By spreading out, there was a chance some of them could survive. Yui used his sword marks to inform all the Sky Palace students of the directive to scatter. The crew split up into 10 different teams. Hansen's team had 9 people. He glanced over his shoulder again, and his face turned black. The little beast was wiggling its bum after his team. "Fuck. I can't be this unlucky. There are so many Marquises here, so why is it choosing us?" Hansen felt as if his luck was worse than it had ever been. Sponsored content, that thing that could eat the Break Sky dolls, as if they were a light snack. So Hansen's demon bug by Sema probably wouldn't do much to stop it. He would die no matter what. Read more new novels on List Novel. Spread out. Hansen had no choice but to dissolve his team. He wanted to ensure the survival of as many of his people as he could. The metal beast seemed to be toying with them though. It wasn't coming at them at its full speed. If it had, it would have caught them already. The Sky Palace students received the command and scattered, splitting up to go in different directions. Hansen turned his head to look at the Metal Eater once again, and his face grew bleak. The fiend was still chasing after him and him alone. "Next time, I'm not cooperating with anyone. This is some really disastrous luck. There are a few hundred people here from various races. I'm neither the biggest nor the prettiest. So what did I do wrong to draw so much of this creature's ire?" Hansen summoned the red cloud and held Bauer tight. He jumped onto the mount and ordered it to flee. The red cloud's tail was like an exhaust plume of red mist. It moved like red light, and its speed was much greater than that of most dukes. But the little beast was able to catch up easily, and it was getting very close. "Why don't you go for the slower ones?" "Why me?" Hansen felt very depressed right about now. As the creature approached, Hansen actually had no idea what to do. Luckily, the beast didn't seem to be in a hurry to eat him. It was more like a cat trying to catch a mouse. It allowed him to stay ahead as it chased him. Sponsored content, seeing that Hansen was getting close to escaping the giant metal god city. Though, the creature decided to speed up. It opened its devilish mouth. It didn't need to get close to swallow Hansen, as its tongue could capture him with ease. Dong! In a last-ditch effort, Hansen summoned his demon bug by Sema to block the critter's tongue attack. Fortunately, the beast had only used its tongue to strike, as the Bysema shook and made a creaking sound. It sounded as if it was on the verge of breaking. Hansen felt a chill. Since the beast hadn't been able to catch Hansen with its tongue, it opened its big mouth. Hansen felt as if the sky was covered by that mouth. He wiped his sword mark away and fired up his Blood Pulse Sutra. Then, Bauer sucked the red cloud back into the gourd, and they traveled back to the sanctuaries. He appeared back in his home in the Alliance. He patted Bauer on the shoulder and sighed. "It is very lucky I was able to survive, but if I cannot exit the metal world, I will be unable to return to the Geno universe proper. Should I go back there from a gate in the sanctuaries? If I do, I will end up in the Baron system." Hansen knew this would be a worse choice than returning straight to the metal world. The metal world had only one scary enemy, but there would be far more than just one in the Baron system. Sponsored content, we will have to wait. Hopefully, when we get back, the monster will have lost interest in me and returned to the pit it emerged from. Then, I will leave the giant metal god city and escape metal world. Hansen tried to comfort himself, but Hansen then thought, that beast should be the same type of creature as my own Metal Eater. I wonder if their language is the same? Maybe I can take Metal Eater there to negotiate with the metal beast. Perhaps we can work something out, so I will be able to leave. After thinking of this, Hansen took Bauer with him to see Metal Eater. Metal Eater lived in an abandoned warehouse. Hansen would have liked the Metal Eater to stay with him, but the little guy was stubborn to remain with metal. Hansen frequently filled the warehouse up with steel, and out of all that steel, the Metal Eater had made a home. He also ate an abundance of it. Luckily, Han Sun was ridiculously rich. One of the Metal Eater's bites could bankrupt an ordinary family forever. Metal Eater had been practicing the ability Consume, which Han Sun had brought back to the sanctuaries with him. Its metallic body was becoming black. Right now, Metal Eater was sleeping on a bed of raw steel. It was like a dragon sleeping atop its trove of treasure. It wasn't too big, only about 2 meters long in total. Perhaps it was because it had practiced Consume, but it looked smaller than it used to. When Han Sun entered the warehouse, Metal Eater got up from its slumber. It ran over to Han Sun's legs and used its tongue to lick them. Han Sun stroked Metal Eater's head, but felt an uncomfortable pang of guilt. After Han Sun kidnapped the creature, it had lost all contact with others of its same kind. And then, after he brought it to the Alliance, he knew Metal Eater would never see its old friends again. And Han Sun didn't even bother spending time with it. It could only look for the creatures around the warehouse when it needed someone to talk to. But its personality was very quiet. It liked to spend much of its time asleep atop plates of steel. It didn't talk much. Metal Eater looked like the metal beast though. Aside from its color and size, they were a 90% match. If I really cannot escape Metal World, I can take Metal Eater to speak with the metal beast. It won't be a noble, so I can always bring it back to the sanctuary. There is no need for me to worry about its safety there, Han Sun thought to himself. He was going to take Metal Eater for a walk first, but it didn't like the prospect. It returned to sleep upon the steel. Han Sun stopped in on the other creatures around the warehouse, then took some time to look over the collection that he kept there. He saw he had collected many things in recent years. One of the most important items of his collection was the body of the gold raven baby. But when he looked for it, he found that it had disappeared. Chapter 2153 Being Eaten. How could it have vanished? Han Sun mumbled in confusion. Sponsored content. The Sun Raven was a baby, but it was a deified creature from the Geno universe. Its deified genes were so stable that Han Sun was unable to absorb them. It would be pointless for a creature in the Alliance to steal it. On top of that, that entire place belonged to Han Sun. Many scary creatures lived there, and they could take over the entire Alliance if he wanted them to. Who would dare to steal anything from him? Han Sun wouldn't make the mistake of forgetting where he had put the body, but he didn't think it had been stolen either. It was too large to move easily anyway. When Han Sun first got the Sun Raven body, he had been unable to absorb it, so he had kept it inside the warehouse for safekeeping. Over the past 2 years, he hadn't looked at it once. With so much time having gone by, he didn't even know when it had gone missing. Han Sun used his Dongxian aura to scan the area, but there was no trace of the bird's body. Its body was very solid, and by all accounts, it should have left behind some sort of sign. Fortunately, the warehouse was equipped with cameras. Han Sun headed for a control room where he could view the camera feeds. But suddenly, Bauer leaped off of Han Sun's shoulders and ran to a specific corner of the warehouse. Han Sun quickly understood that Bauer had found something, and so he followed after her. Bauer had gone to a wooden crate. She climbed atop it and looked inside. Han Sun recalled that the crate had been used to store barrels of wine that Ji Yanran had bought. They had been produced on a famous vineyard planet. But since the wine required a rare ingredient that the makers could no longer obtain, the wine's production had ceased. Ji Yanran had taken the crates there to collect what she could. They did not drink together very often, and so they were just kept in storage when not needed. The open crate was evidence that someone had been there. Sponsored content, and on top of that, a few other crates were open as well. There really has been a theft. Han Sun moved over to Bauer and inspected the crates. Han Sun saw a tall black barrel that had also been opened. It had been drained of the wine it previously contained, but when Han Sun looked inside, he saw the last thing he expected to see. There was not a single drop of alcohol remaining, but at the bottom of the container was a fist-sized egg. Its shell was red, and it looked very beautiful. Han Sun used his Dongxian aura to scan the item, and from the red egg, he could discern something that felt very familiar. He could tell that it belonged to the little red bird that used to follow Bauer around. After thinking about this, Han Sun realized he hadn't seen or heard much about the little bird over the past couple of years. He had been too busy, and the bird tended to follow Bauer anyway, so he hadn't spared it much attention. Han's son picked up the egg from the empty keg, and after a keener inspection, he was able to tell that it did indeed contain a presence that belonged to the little red bird. Weird. Why would it be here? And why would it become an egg? Han's son wondered about this, and then he looked at Bauer. Bauer shook her head, indicating that she had no clue either. Sponsored content. The little red bird had a strange history. When they first found it, it was in the Phoenix Nirvana. It had been in its sunfish form at the time, but when it left the water of the pool, it transformed into a little red bird. It was certainly a strange creature, because the little red bird did not have attacking power. Han's son quickly stopped paying attention to it. He allowed Bauer to keep the thing as a pet. Now that the little red bird had come to the warehouse, and it had apparently drained an entire barrel of wine and turned into an egg, it all seemed rather strange. Han's son brought the egg that the little red bird had become to the security room. He had 3 years of footage to peruse, and so he started watching them on fast forward. After a while, Han's son saw motion on the monitor. Around 2 years ago, not long after he brought the sun raven's body to the warehouse, the little red bird flew in and began eating it. Although Han's son had been unable to refine the sun raven's body, the little red bird munched on it with no problem. But it had only been able to eat a small amount of it each time. The little bird was like a woodpecker, and after a whole year of nibbling, the entire body was consumed. As it ate the sun raven's body, the little red bird underwent a metamorphosis that changed its body continually over the course of the year. Eventually, its body became a red crystal that burned with a constant flame. After the little red bird ate the entire sun raven's body, it flew towards one of the crates and opened it, then pulled the top off a barrel. The little guy splashed down into the alcohol and became a little red fish. The fire that enveloped it was extinguished, but the heat must have vaporized the alcohol inside. Within a few minutes, the barrel was as dry as a bone. Sponsored content. And then the little red bird came out of the egg. It went into each and every barrel and did the same, ruining the whole supply of alcohol. After the little red bird reached the final barrel, it hadn't emerged again until Han's son came along and took it. Damn! What is this thing? It ate the sun raven and evolved. Han's son looked at the egg in his hand in shock. Han's son was unable to refine the deified body, so it was difficult to imagine how the little red bird had done so. Whatever. I couldn't refine the body anyway. I just hope that whatever it becomes will be something of moderate usefulness. Ultimately, Han's son decided to put the red egg back. Han's son did not know what it might take for the creature to successfully incubate, but if it had selected that place by its own volition, then that was probably the best bet. Han's son rested at home for the next few days. He didn't return to the metal world just yet. He did, however, worry about Yia. Unfortunately, there was nothing he could do about that right now. He only hoped that the others had found safety after escaping the giant metal city. Han's son held Hanlinger while Bauer sat next to him. The three of them watched movies and ate snacks. Hanlinger was holding a milk bottle which she drank from, just like Bauer used to do when she was younger. Ji Yanran returned from the company and its business, and there, she saw Han's son and Bauer asleep on the couch. Hanlinger was asleep atop Han's son with a pacifier in her mouth. There were snacks and toys everywhere. Seriously? This is how you choose to be a father? Ji Yanran complained, but she did so with a light-hearted smile. She didn't wake them up either. She draped a blanket across them and tidied up. 4 days later, Han's son went back to the warehouse where Metal Eater resided. He planned on taking Metal Eater with him now, in the hopes that he could negotiate with the metal beast if he encountered it again. Just in case, Han's son summoned the dragon wings on his back, and the dragon wings attached to his ears. If something went wrong, he could teleport away with Metal Eater and gain enough space to escape back to the sanctuaries again. Being alive was more important than anything else. Chapter 2150. For the meeting of two metal beasts. After completing his preparations, Han's son brought Bauer and Metal Eater to the metal world. Sponsored content. After they arrived, Han's son didn't waste time looking around for a threat. He grabbed Bauer and Metal Eater in a hurry and teleported away from the area. Fortunately, his greatest worries were unfounded. The little metal beast wasn't waiting to attack him on his return. But when Han Sun had a look around, depression sank into him. The worst scenario might not have transpired. But that didn't mean his arrival had gone unnoticed. Rather than returning to the pit it had emerged from, as Han Sun wished, the metal beast was sleeping atop a ruin constructed of rubble, as if it were a mountain. Han Sun's teleportation had roused the metal beast. It got up and looked at Han Sun. Damn it! If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have teleported. I should have snuck away. Han Sun groused. Upon seeing Han Sun, the metal beast stood up. But then, when it noticed Metal Eater, its eyes widened. Han Sun's Metal Eater looked at the metal beast with equal amounts of curiosity. The black and white metal beasts stared at each other. It worked. Han Sun was happy. The white metal beast stared at the other for a while. It squealed at Metal Eater. It seemed to be saying something, but Han Sun had no clue what. At the very least, it didn't sound threatening. Metal Eater wriggled out of Han Sun's arms and dropped onto the ground. Then it made some noise at the white metal beast in return. Sponsored content: the white metal beast made another sound and ran towards Metal Eater. This made Han Sun nervous, of course. He wanted to grab Metal Eater and run for it. But Metal Eater was actually running at the white metal beast instead. Han Sun knew that Metal Eater wasn't a terribly smart creature, but it could sense danger. It wouldn't allow itself to fall into harm. So, Han Sun shelved his plan to teleport away and watched the pair keenly. The black and white metal beasts came together. They looked at each other. Metal Eater was much larger than the white metal beast, but its power was much weaker. That was an aspect of their meeting that worried Han Sun. Beastie. The two metal beasts both cast their shields. The white metal beast's shield was transparent, but Metal Eater's shield was infused with the power of consume. Because of this, it was a bit darker. The white metal beast circled Metal Eater and gave it a sniff. Are they talking in code? Han Sun was very worried. He was worried that the white metal beast might discover that Metal Eater wasn't the same kind. Or maybe it would attack Metal Eater, because the sanctuary creature was too weak to compare. The white metal beast circled around Metal Eater some more, and eventually, it jumped. Han Sun's heart almost froze. And just as he was about to move and save Metal Eater, he realized that the white metal beast was actually jumping towards the pit it had initially emerged from. Sponsored content: Metal Eater didn't move. It looked in the direction that the white metal beast had disappeared. A cold sweat had gathered on Han Sun's forehead. If the white metal beast wished to kill Metal Eater, he didn't know if he had what it took to save his companion. Good, but what exactly happened? Did they recognize each other? Or do they just need to talk some more? Han Sun's heart was oscillating at a number of different speeds. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower. While Han Sun was still deep in thought, the white metal beast returned from its hole. Its fat body came waddling over to Metal Eater. Han Sun saw that the white metal beast was holding a metal branch about the length of a man's arm. The branch contained a few metallic fruits. The white metal beast moved over to Metal Eater and placed the branch directly in front of him. Metal Eater showed no reaction to it, so the white metal beast walked closer to its alternate self and made some loud sniffing noises. Metal Eater lowered its head, rolled its tongue out, and gobbled up one of the fruits. When the white metal beast saw Metal Eater consume one of the fruits, it merrily ran around it. It stood next to Metal Eater and used its body to rub against the larger creature. It looked very happy. Metal Eater ate a few more of those metallic fruits, and its body began to shine. Then Metal Eater released a strange substance. It became a Geno armament to envelope its body, then melted back inside the creature. Sponsored content: is it going to become a baron? Han Sun was as surprised as he was delighted. Han Sun was happy that the white metal beast had given Metal Eater a metallic fruit that was obviously some good stuff. But he was surprised that Metal Eater was becoming a baron. Now it couldn't return to the sanctuary without being harmed. But a metal world like this is far more suitable for it. It won't have to stay in the warehouse all alone, Han Sun thought to himself. The white metal beast appeared to guard Metal Eater, while it made the change to become a baron. It stared at Han Sun and Bauer as if they were thieves. You are the outsider here, it seemed to be saying. Han Sun felt awkward. Metal Eater's evolution appeared to go well. Its form grew darker and smaller, but its body looked more metallic than ever. Seeing Metal Eater's successful evolution, the white metal beast happily licked Metal Eater's cheek. It was definitely a sign of affection. Han Sen became concerned though. If he wasn't certain Metal Eater was a male, he would think that the white metal beast was looking for someone to mate with. Metal Eater is male. If the white metal beast is female, then they can mate. But the white metal beast is so strong. God knows how long it's been alive for. Isn't it a bit too old for my Metal Eater? Han Sen looked at them strangely. The very lovely scene, in Han Sen's eyes, became vaguely ominous. Metal Eater was very quiet, unlike the white metal beast that was so active. The white metal beast had spoken a few times, but it had received a response only once. But even so, the white metal beast was very happy. It returned to the hole, and provided Metal Eater with even more of its metallic fruits. Shit! Is that thing hitting on my Metal Eater? If that is the case, a sacrifice might have to be made. Whether or not we can escape Metal World depends on you, Metal Eater. Work your charms. Han Sen encouraged Metal Eater, but quite clearly Metal Eater did not understand what it was being told. All it did was munch on the fruit the white metal beast had brought it. It was so lazy that it didn't even speak. Chapter 2155 Han Sen's Guess. Sponsored content. Font big middle small. Previous index. Next add bookmarks. You watched the developing red storm, his frown sinking deep into the lines of his face. 4 days ago, they had managed to escape from the metal city, because that horrifying metal beast had gone after Han Sen. The creature had followed Han Sen long enough for the rest of them to clear the city. They continued fleeing frantically across the land, but they eventually realized that the metal beast had no interest in leaving the city to capture them. They had, however, lost all contact with Han Sen, and Han Sen was their leader. The elders had instructed them to look after Han Sen and ensure no harm befell him. But now it was game over. That monster had managed to eat king-class elites for a light snack, so there was a very high probability that Han Sen was a dead man. Ugh, there is no point in worrying about this now. Unless we find a way to escape this place ourselves, we are all going to die here. In that case, we wouldn't even be able to report what happened here. Yuya ended with a sigh. The Buddha, dragon, and demon had stayed together. After the fighting, those 3 races put together still had fewer people than the Sky Palace team. So there was a big power gap between them. But they were all in the same boat now, and they all had to find a way to leave. The more people that could leave, the better. Yuya had no interest in bullying anyone anymore. Sponsored content. Khan and the others weren't dumb. They knew Sky Palace was in control of the situation now, and Yuya was the leader for the time being. They had no plans to stir up trouble, but they couldn't figure out a way to escape from the metal world. They were well and truly trapped. The environment of the metal world was awful. All the creatures were made of metal, so there was no local source of food for them. Although they still had some supplies, it'd only be a matter of time before they died. Han Sen's Metal Eater was definitely playing hard to get. The white metal beast kept trying to please it by being as friendly as possible. Metal Eater didn't respond much, but Han Sen could still tell that it was happy to have found a partner. Han Sen and Bauer were given some goodies too. Han Sen and Bauer could not eat the metallic fruits, but the white metal beast did give them something to drink. It probably did that on behalf of Metal Eater. Han Sen drank some of that fluid, and he noticed that it seemed to resonate with a sort of power. It immediately began to improve his genes. The white metal beast stayed close to Metal Eater, and it kept rubbing Metal Eater with its head. It confused Han Sen a great deal. The creatures in the sanctuaries had the genes of the Geno universe. Han Sen knew that the crystallizers had brought many of the Geno universe's creatures to the sanctuaries for research. That was how many of the creatures in the sanctuaries had been created. Sponsored content. But Stay Up Late also told him that the crystallizers only did all that to improve the blood of the crystallizers themselves. All the genes that they researched they intended to combine with their own race in one way or another. The crystallizers had the same power as a high race in the Geno universe, but they had to rely on their technology for that power. Eventually, they challenged another high race, and were destroyed. At that point, would they have possessed enough power to take the genes of all those creatures to the sanctuaries? especially in their weakened state. The crystallizers shouldn't have been able to beat the genes of creatures like the little red bird, golden growler, and metal eater. And there were many creatures with such blood in the sanctuaries. Han Sen could not imagine how the crystallizers might have accomplished all of this. Stay Up Late said that the crystallizers did not build the sanctuaries. Apparently, they already existed before the crystallizers stumbled across them. Since the entrance to the sanctuaries lies with Sacred, is Sacred responsible for creating the sanctuaries? Han Sen thought to himself. Han Sen thought that had to be correct. From the stories he had heard, only Sacred had once possessed the sort of power necessary to collect the genes of so many powerful creatures. The crystallizers couldn't have done it. Plus, Sacred existed before the crystallizers, which fit with what Stay Up Late had told him. The crystallizers must have found the sanctuaries at a later date and modified them. So maybe the sanctuaries were built by Sacred, but why? Why were they throwing powerful genes into the sanctuaries? What creatures were born in the sanctuaries? What was sent there? Sponsored content. The 9-Life Cat was linked to Sacred somehow, and he was able to go in and out of the sanctuaries as he pleased. It looked like 9-Life Cat himself was researching the people of the sanctuaries. And at some point in the past, an event transpired that resulted in the ruin and dissolution of Sacred. A strong faction was suddenly reduced to dust and echoes. Sacred became a barren system, and somehow, the crystallizers stumbled onto another way to enter the sanctuaries, claim them, and modify them. When their race was almost destroyed, the remaining crystallizers sought refuge in the sanctuaries and continued their research on genes. What Han Sen couldn't determine was whether the crystallizers conducted all their research by themselves, or if they carried on with the research left behind by Sacred. But all of this was just theory devised by Han Sen. Nothing could be taken as fact. Only that old cat can answer the questions I have, Han Sen thought with frustration. Everything hinged on Sacred, and that hated cat. Han Sen lacked the power to get in and explore the barren system. So for now, he couldn't learn the truth. As Han Sen was lost in thought, Metal Eater approached. It warbled at Han Sen, and then looked towards the hole. The white metal beast stood beside the pit, and seemed to be indicating that they should enter. Metal Eater went first, and Han Sen followed with Bauer. He wanted to see what the nest of a deified creature might look like. The entrance to the hole was massive, but its walls sloped down like a huge funnel, becoming narrower as it went. At the bottom was another cave that was about 1 meter wide. The white metal beast and Metal Eater entered it, with Han Sen and Bauer following. Han Sen thought it was a cave, but when he looked down he froze. How can this be here? Han Sen stared, having a difficult time believing his eyes. Tip: you can use left, right, A and D keyboard keys to browse between chapters. Chapter 2156 Warehouse. Sponsored content. Beneath the pit, there was a space that was reminiscent of a warehouse. Inside that space, Han Sen saw many giant metal cubes sitting in lines. They looked like storage containers, but they were bigger than the sort of boxes you'd expect to find in a warehouse. When Han Sen got closer, he realized that each cube was covered in giant handprints. He had seen one of these metallic cubes before in Naramoon. The blue metal cube the rebate had retrieved from the Ligu ruins looked just like the boxes he was seeing now. When that blue metallic cube was opened, it released a collection of blue-gold demon bugs. They assaulted Naramoon, dealing great damage to the system. And while that was bad, Han Sen had managed to obtain his demon bug by Sima through the ordeal, which had saved his life numerous times already. That entire scenario, and the subsequent results, were an affair Han Sen would never forget. Han Sen counted 24 cubes sitting in front of him. The cube he had seen before was entirely blue, but 12 of these were gold and 12 of them were green. And while the symbols upon the two types were similar to each other, they were different from engravings on the blue cube. Also, each cube seemed to have its own unique set of handprints. If the handprints were passwords, then each cube had a special password. Sponsored content. Are the Ligu ruins connected to the Break Skies? If so, then the Break Skies have many bloodlines, Han Sen thought to himself. Han Sen wasn't worried about the demon bug cubes opening though. They wouldn't unfurl unless the password was punched in, And even if they did open up, the demon bugs wouldn't stand a chance against the white metal beast that had led them there. Speaking of the white metal beast, it moved between two cubes. Han Sen followed, with Bauer held tightly in his arms. As they traveled by the giant cubes, Han Sen stumbled across many dead metallic xenogeneics, metallic fruits, and metallic plants. It really did seem to be the home of the white metal beast. Not too far away was a number of transparent tanks that were each as big as an oil truck. Some of the tanks were empty, whereas 5 of them were full to the brim with a transparent liquid. Han Sen took a look and quickly concluded that it was the very same liquid he and Bauer had been gifted by the white metal beast earlier on. The transparent tanks all had a name written on them, spelled out in the common language of the Geno universe. They each read, Metal Xenogeneic Fluid. The text also went on to explain the effects that the liquid would have after consumption. If metallic creatures drank that liquid, they would turn into xenogeneics immediately. If a metal xenogeneic drank it, the liquid would make them stronger. There were a few hundred of those canisters, but the white metal beast appeared to have already drunk most of them. There were only 5 left, and one of them was not as full as it could have been. The critter must have been actively drinking from that one. Sponsored content. The white metal beast directed Metal Eater to eat more of its metallic fruit. The creature also encouraged Metal Eater to drink the metal xenogeneic fluid. As the Metal Eater ambled over, Han Sen brought out 2 cups. He dipped the cups into the metal xenogeneic fluid and filled them up, with one for Bauer and one for himself. The cells inside him underwent strange changes when he drank the liquid. Han Sen quickly fired up the story of genes to refine the metal xenogeneic fluid. The story of genes was finally growing, and this made him incredibly happy. Han Sen walked around the warehouse and came across something strange. It must have been something left behind by the breaks guys, but Han Sen couldn't quite tell what it was. Neither could he tell how to make use of it. He could see bite marks on it where the white metal beast had bitten off chunks. He supposed it could have been a food of sorts. The warehouse was mostly composed of metal, and it appeared that the metal cubes were the only things that the white metal beast hadn't been gnawing on. Han Sen felt unnerved by this fact though. He curiously pondered why the white metal beast had decided not to eat the demon bug cubes. Han Sen got close to the metal cubes and realized that the outside of each cube was covered by a layer of something. It looked almost like a sheet of rubber or wax, but it was transparent and very thin. Han Sen had to use the Dongxian Sutra to see it properly. I wonder if I can talk to the white metal beast. After opening the metal cube, he might be able to eat the bugs inside and leave me a half-dead demon bug king. Perhaps I could even snag myself another demon bug king beast soul. Han Sen pondered this. Han Sen tried to think of a way that he could communicate with the white metal beast. They did not speak the same language, so it wasn't as if they could really speak to each other. So he ended up settling for exaggerated gestures. He came to learn that the white metal beast was not fond of the metal cubes because of their smell, and it really wasn't fond of that outer layer. The creature wouldn't dare bite the cubes with that layer still on. Sponsored content. And furthermore, Han Sen's power wouldn't be enough to remove the layer by brute force. If he wanted to open the metal cube, he would have to activate the password by palming the prints in the correct order. Figuring out the password won't be difficult, but I will have to talk to the white metal beast first, Han Sen thought. Han Sen wasn't in a rush though. He walked around the warehouse, and on its other side, he actually found something that was not metallic. There were books that had been stored inside a metal box. The white metal beast had chewed up the metal box, leaving the books spread across the area. The books seemed to be made of plastic rather than paper or cloth, but the material was much stronger than actual plastic. Han Sen tried burning them, but they appeared to have no reaction to the touch of flame. The box had originally contained 6 books, but each of the books was the size of a small house. They must have belonged to the original inhabitants, the breaks guys. Han Sen had to fly up to see what was written on them. The 6 books were named Break 6 Skies. It was a Geno art belonging to the breaks guys. Han Sen was interested in a breaks guy's Geno art. He started reading over it, and he was able to determine that it was a fairly violent technique. It employed an impact upon a gene's substance to create an explosion, Every hit was able to create an explosion that was stronger than the initial impact. From what he could tell, though, the Geno art was way too dangerous. The explosions would harm everyone, even the user, so you could blow yourself up if you weren't careful. That was too fucking cruel. Chapter 2157 Break 6 Sky Sponsored Content. It is very violent, but I must admit I do like the concept. Hansen quickly memorized all the content of the Break 6 Skies he had just read, and he made plans to learn and practice it when he found the time. It was such a violent Geno art that it could easily be used to challenge enemies that were a higher level than he was. Still, it did seem particularly difficult to learn. It was a very rough and visceral Geno art, but wielding it required a lot of precise skill. The difficulty level was definitely up there with Sky Palace's Suppress Evil. As an analogy, the Geno art was like a human nuke. Even if the user understood the principles of how it worked, trying to make use of it without blowing yourself up was a difficult feat to achieve. Hansen was not worried about the level of precision required, of course, and he had his Dongxian Sutra. With that, he could control any substance. That made it far easier for him to practice other skills than it would be for any other person or creature. Even so, training this skill would require a lot of time. He currently had a lot of other skills to practice, and he wasn't even in the mood to start, so he wasn't going to do anything with it just yet. Hansen looked around the warehouse some more, but he didn't find anything else that was half as interesting. He eventually returned his focus to the metal cubes. He started talking with the white metal beast, despite the fact that there was a rather severe language barrier. Hansen put in a lot of effort to overcome it, and he used Metal Eater as bait to entice the metal beast to cooperate with him. Hansen was eventually able to confirm that the white metal beast would leave him the half-dead, half-deified demon bug king. Upon settling on that, Hansen went over to one of the metal cubes. Sponsored content: the white metal beast had eaten the demon bugs before. The only thing it didn't like was the layer atop the cubes. When Hansen asked the white metal beast to leave an ordinary demon bug xenogenic gene for him, he was met with a stern refusal. That wouldn't be allowed. And even making Metal Eater seduce the white metal beast did not change its mind. So Hansen gave up on that prospect. 24 demon bug kings. I should be able to get a demon bug king beast soul for sure. Just one is all I need. Hansen thought to himself as he stood before a gold metal cube. The handprint pattern passwords of the Breakskis gold metal cubes were all different from each other, and figuring out each combination was a headache. Getting the right code by chance was less likely than winning the lottery. The chances were as slim as a supernova creating humans. But Hansen did not need to rely on luck. As he examined the gold metal cube, a purple color flowed into his right eye. The black pupil became entirely purple, then split into 4. It became a purple pupil composed of 4 petals. That was the spectacle beast soul Hansen had received from killing Evil Eye. It was called Purple Eye Butterfly, and it was a deified beast soul. Although that was not a beast soul used for fighting, Hansen still treasured it. He considered it more of an asset than any fighting-type beast soul. Even a deified weapon beast soul was just a weapon with deified powers. Although possessing it would make Hansen more powerful, it'd still be useless against an actual deified enemy. The purple-eyed butterfly spectacles were different, though. Even against a deified enemy, they would be very useful. Hansen stared at the gold cube with his right eye, and the 4 petals in his eye began to spin. It looked very weird. As the petals spun, Hansen's right eye could see something he would not have been able to see otherwise. Sponsored content: it was different from the purple eye god lights. The spectacle couldn't restrain an enemy, but it could allow Hansen to analyze a substance's structure and thereby research it more effectively. When Hansen looked at it with his purple eye, it was like he was playing back the entire sequence of the gold cube's creation. He saw its components stripped away one by one until it was only a pile of raw material. Hansen was able to see every step of how the thing was made. If he had his own materials, he figured he could create one himself. With the whole process unfolding before him, Hansen looked for the password that had been input into the gold cube. Hansen didn't actually plan on making a cube of his own, though, so the only thing he decided to memorize was the password. After doing that, he put away the spectacles. He gathered up power in his hands and started smacking the prints. When Han Sen's last strike landed on a print, he retreated without a moment of hesitation. He pulled Bauer and Metal Eater close, then summoned his demon bug Bysema. They all hugged each other tight, so that Han Sen could make the Bysema as strong as possible. That way, even if a half-deified demon bug king came to strike them, the shield wouldn't break under the force of a single blow. Catcha! The gold cube started to split open, and before long, it wholly shattered. The metal cube became a rapidly unfurling swarm of gold demon bugs. They were each half as big as a fully grown human, and in a few seconds, gold demon bugs were frantically flying everywhere. Sponsored content. Han Sen looked at the gold demon bugs, and he noticed that they looked almost exactly like the blue demon bugs. It was obvious that they were the same species. Upon seeing all those demon bugs, the white metal beast looked extremely happy. It only disliked the layer that coated the cubes. He found the bugs themselves quite tasty. Before the gold demon bugs could spread out, the white metal beast opened its mouth and swallowed the entire swarm of them. Hey, you said you'd leave the gold demon bug king for me, but you went and ate them all. Han Sen shouted in frustration. The gluttonous creature had eaten every single bug. Han Sen had put in a lot of effort to open that cube, but despite that, he had gotten nothing for all his work. While Han Sen sulked, the white metal beast opened its mouth and spat out a few things. There were many gold bug crystals. They all glowed with golden light, looking like the rarest of gems. There was one amongst them that must have been the king-class xenogenic gene. Aside from those gold bug crystals, a gold demon bug was spat out too. Its body was half melted, and its organs were even oozing out in places. It struggled on the ground, writhing around. It looked as if it would give up the ghost at any second. Thanks. Han Sen was absolutely thrilled. He used his ghost teat knife to slash the gold demon bug king. He mumbled to himself, "Give me a beast soul. Give me a beast soul." Even if your demon bug king beast soul is the same, it'd still be the best beast soul to have. I can give one to my wife and kids. I could hand them out one each, and then they could survive anything. Only a deified elite might pose a threat. Chapter 2158. Getting Beast Soul. Sponsored content. Han Sen slashed the dying demon bug king's wounds. With the cut, the demon bug king moaned, but it didn't die. He gathered more power and used tusk alongside his ghost teeth knife. He had to strike the bug 14 times before hearing the familiar sound he enjoyed oh so much. Mutant xenogenic king hunted, gold demon bug king. Xenogenic gene found. Han Sen was disappointed by this result. That mutant gold demon bug king hadn't given him a beast soul. Well, there are still 23 more of these fuckers to kill. There's no need to panic just yet, Han Sen thought to himself. He turned back to the white metal beast. The white metal beast swallowed the mutant gold demon bug king's body, and like it had with the lesser variants, it spat out the mutant gold demon bug king crystal. That crystal was even prettier than an ordinary king class. The white metal beast pushed the mutant king class and a few of the king class crystals towards Metal Eater. It seemed like Metal Beast intended them as a gift. Han Sen felt depressed about this. He had never encountered anyone kind enough to gift him such a bounty of worthwhile gifts. Metal Eater did not seem to be able to digest those king class bug crystals though. It tried to bite down on the crystals, but despite the effort they did not break. If he cannot eat them now, why not let me keep them? Han Sen asked with a smile. The white metal beast ignored him though. It merely took the bug crystals and stored them elsewhere. It wasn't planning on Han Sen walking away with them. Sponsored content. Han Sen could do nothing except shake his head in dismay. The white metal beast then walked over to another gold cube. It made some noises at Han Sen, as if telling him to do his thing and open that one next. Han Sen wanted to do this anyway, so he hastily ran over to the gold cube and put his deified spectacle back on. With it, he swiftly unlocked the password of the gold cube and opened it. BZD. The gold demon bugs swarmed out of the cube again. Just like before, the white metal beast was able to swallow them all. But this time, it did not spit out the bug crystals. After a while though, it did spit out a mutant gold demon bug king. And just like before, the poor bug was on the precipice of giving up the ghost. Han Sun slashed it. The strike felt incredibly satisfying. Killing a king-class Xenogeniac wasn't a thing many marquises could ever hope to accomplish. And on top of that, this wasn't just an ordinary king-class creature. It was a mutant king-class creature. Han Sun was very weak right now, in the grand scheme of things. Ghost Teeth Knife slashed the Demon Bug King's wounds, and after a few good swings, he finally slew the thing. Mutant Xenogeniac King hunted, Gold Demon Bug King. Xenogeniac gene found. Han Sun sighed. Again, there was no beast soul for him. He would need to open the next cube to get what he sought. One after another, they went through the cubes. After the 7th Gold Demon Bug King was slain, Han Sun was delighted to hear the announcement that informed him of his acquisition of a beast soul. Mutant Xenogeniac King hunted, Gold Demon Bug King. Xenogeniac gene found. Obtain mutant Gold Demon Bug Beast soul. Sponsored content filled with excitement. Han Sun hurriedly checked out the mutant Gold Demon Bug Beast soul he had just managed to snag. Mutant Gold Demon Bug King Beast soul. By some type upon seeing it, Han Sun laughed. Ha, ha, I really do get whatever I want. My luck is back. Now, Han Sun couldn't wait to open the rest of the metal cubes. The white metal beast was having a good time too, so it merrily followed along to eat its fill of the bugs that Han Sun was providing. The next few mutant Gold Demon Bug Kings did not provide him with any more beast souls, but just as he was resigning himself to the fact that he might not receive another mutant Gold Demon Bug King beast soul, the last mutant Gold Demon Bug King gave him another. Han Sun was grinning ear to ear. He then went on to open the green cubes. He released the green demon bugs so that the white metal beast could eat them. Mutant Xenogeniac King hunted Green Demon Bug King. Xenogeniac gene found. Obtain mutant green demon bug beast soul. Lady Luck is head over heels for me, isn't she? Han Sun was ecstatic. He had received a beast soul from the very first mutant Green Demon Bug King. That was quite a mood booster. Seeing that the Green Demon Bug King's beast soul was also a Bysema, he was incredibly joyful. But then something changed. Han Sun kept killing the rest of the creatures that the white metal beast left for him. But he didn't receive any more beast souls. Every time Han Sun believed he would get another beast soul, he didn't. Their progress quickly devolved into a mutant demon bug king murder fest. Sponsored content. I am still quite happy to have gotten 3 mutant king beast souls. That haul is pretty impressive. Han Sun didn't complain about it too much, as he really was quite pleased to receive the 3 he had. Complain about it too much, as he really was quite pleased to receive the 3 he had. The white metal beast scoffed down every demon bug it could, but it kept spitting out the king-class bug crystals for Metal Eater. He didn't take them back either. They were like toys for Metal Eater. Han Sun had concluded that the white metal beast could access another dimension. He was only storing the bug crystals, not eating them himself. Ultimately, however, that did not matter to Han Sun. Having 3 demon bug king beast souls made him a very happy man already. Let's see if the gold Bysema and the green Bysema are as strong as the blue one. Han Sun summoned the gold demon bug king's beast soul. Han Sun saw a gold light appear around him. Aside from the color being different, there did not seem to be anything separating it from the blue demon bug king's Bysema. After checking out the green Bysema, he noticed that it was exactly the same as well. All that was different was the color. The defensive properties were identical. Can I use these Bysemes together? Han Sun thought to himself. Then, he summoned all of the Demon Bug King Bysemes. Han Sun summoned all 4 Demon Bug King Bysemes, but one of them did not work. The 3 Bysemes he successfully summoned combined to become a blue, gold, and green Bysema. The one that he couldn't summon for use was the second gold Bysema. I can't use the same color Bysema beast souls together, but those of different colors can be combined. Han Sun was surprised. He tried out the tricolor Demon Bug King Bysema, and noticed that it was far stronger than any single color Bysema. This discovery was as surprising as it was exciting. These Bysema beast souls can be combined. I wonder how many demon bugs the Break Skies created. If there are more colors, Perhaps I can stack those together too. It might give me the defense of a deified being. Han Sen knew the chances of that were extremely low though. Even if there were other colors out there, he might not be lucky enough to get their beast souls. In addition to that, finding the demon bugs would be a task and a half. The tricolor demon bug king by Sima is strong enough for now. It will certainly withstand a half-deified elite. Han Sen felt so happy. Chapter 2159 Spell Levels Up Sponsored Content. All the races that sent Marquis teams to Metal World were growing worried. Their elites had been waiting outside the planet, but after half a month went by, not a single Marquis had returned. They sent a few more Marquises to find out what might have transpired there, but none of them came back either. All of the elders were growing angry at the threat to their people. The first scouts that they sent to Metal World had gone in, and then come back out without issue. But now, not a single Marquis seemed able to return. It confused them a great deal. They were very disturbed. Although 100 Marquises was nothing to those higher races, they were fighting for territory. They had sent out their best elites of Marquis rank. Having their fighters trapped inside dealt a lot of damage to those races. The white metal beast told Han Sen how he could leave Metal World. The storm that plagued Metal World cycled between blue and red, and most of the time, leaving was impossible. Every 10th swap of color, however, there would be a brief pause in the storm. It was only during that time that the planet could be escaped. When the demons and the Buddhas first traveled there, it was during that small window. That was how they were able to enter and leave. Now they needed to wait for 10 red and blue storms to pass before trying to leave the surface. In total, that would be a month and a half. There was still a while until the window opened again, so Han Sen wasn't in a rush to move just yet. Han Sen was enjoying the benefits of being friends with Metal Eater, and he was able to consume the metal xenogenic fluid each and every day. He actually didn't want to leave the cave for the time being. He wanted to drink as much as he could so he could level up the story of genes. Han Sen went to search for Yuya and the others. They were staying with the remainder of the dragon, Buddha, and demon. They were surviving under the protection of a secluded cave. They weren't really in any danger, but their supplies were swiftly dwindling. Thus, they were becoming desperate to find a way out. Unfortunately for them, they'd yet done so. Sponsored content. Han Sen didn't meet with them though. He stayed close to the white metal beast and kept drinking its metal xenogenic fluid. As he waited for the 10th cycle of the storms, he spent most of his time practicing the story of genes. For some reason, the white metal beast had no interest in leaving the metal city. Han Sen couldn't lure or take it away from there either. Han Sen kept refining the metal xenogenic fluid, and after a whole month, the story of genes finally began to change. It was becoming Marquis. Is it finally happening? Han Sen was excited. He had used so many resources to level it up, and he had always wondered what new powers he might achieve upon leveling it up to Marquis. I wonder if it will develop a new shape. Of course, if the power doesn't increase proportionately, then this Geno art wouldn't be very well balanced. The resources consumed thus far would be a waste, and I'm not even sure if there would be any point carrying on with its practice. The spell armor began to glow with holy light. Spell was now shining as brightly as a sun. Boom! Han Sen's body shook, and then the armor disappeared. It took on the shape of a lady standing directly in front of Han Sen. Sponsored content. The lady was covered in a holy light, and her hair waved like sunbeams. The 2 pistols spell wielded became bright too. They gave off so much light that Han Sen couldn't look directly at them. Han Sen's body felt like a fast-flowing waterfall was rushing through it. His body connected with Spell's energy and began glowing extremely strongly. Boom! Finally, Spell's light started to explode like a volcano, and a holy light fired into the sky. Spell's body floated in the midst of that holy geyser of light, and a strange spell symbol appeared on her forehead. Han Sen did not know what changes the flower-like spell was experiencing. She was shining but not very brightly, but she was inside the stream of light, and the shadow of her form was clearly visible. The holy light focused on her forehead, and it gathered up the powers of Spell. All of that light was beaming down into Spell's flower. The flower had not changed, and Spell looked just like she always did. Spell's battle body has increased to Marquis class. Han Sun heard this announcement in his head. His body had also gotten a whole bunch stronger. Sponsored content. His physical form now made him invincible amongst all the other marquises. Even a top-class dragon marquis wouldn't have a body that was remotely comparable to Han Sen's. What confused Han Sun was that Spell did not gain a new form. Her forehead was just imbued with a strange spell symbol. He had no idea what the symbol even meant. Yuya Khan and the others all looked glum. They had been looking for a way to leave Metal World for the longest time, but their efforts had all failed. They were on the verge of running out of supplies. It was usually safe when they left the cave during a blue storm, but this time, they met a few metal dragonflies. They killed the insects, but more appeared and chased them back to their camp. They relied on the constricted entrance of the cave to fight off their enemies, and at first it worked. But there were some dukes among their attackers, and as a result, they were unable to hold the enemy off. Damn, we are losing men. Should we retreat? A dragonfly sank its teeth into a Buddha, and a whole chunk of his arm's flesh was torn out. He let out a blood-curdling scream. All of our resources are here. If we lose those, we won't survive long no matter what we do. Plus, there are too many xenogeneics for us to risk splitting up. That would just get us all killed, Uni coldly said. If we don't run now, we will surely die here. The Buddha Marquis shouted back. There are too many xenogeneics in the blue storm this time, and there are dukes amongst them. We cannot fend them off forever. Dragon 8 and Yuya remained silent as the others argued. At this stage, there could be no falling back. They would settle for either getting out of Metal World or dying. The group kept killing what they could, but some marquises fled the cave. They wanted to take their chances outside the cave, but the dragonflies, upon spotting the deserters, came from everywhere. There was nowhere they could run that the dragonflies wouldn't follow. They would have to fight until exhaustion claimed them, and when that happened, their bodies would be devoured. Dragon 8 roared, and the rest of his dragon followed him to abandon their camp. When he saw what was outside, however, he felt hopeless. Not even his gold dragon body could keep up this fight forever. Yuya brought the Sky Palace students out with him too. All those dragonflies swarmed them, and they had nowhere to flee. As despair came to claim their hearts, something weird appeared inside the swarm of xenogeneics. Chapter 2160 Violent Explosion, Sponsored Content Boom. Yuya and the others were fighting hard when they heard an explosion echo from afar. There was a light blooming among all those xenogeneics. The swarm of xenogeneics all started to churn, as if they were super nervous. Boom! There was another explosion, and its sound made the marquis's ears hurt. A mushroom cloud rose visibly over the landscape this time. The shockwave spread, and swathes of the dragonflies were blown into nothing but bits. Boom! 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 Many more mushroom clouds exploded amidst the army of xenogeneics that had descended upon them. Great numbers of the dragonflies were destroyed, and the ensuing vacuum sucked living dragonflies back into the wreckage. A red shadow emerged from the dust and haze. It looked like a man holding a rocket launcher, and again, rockets leaped out of the cylindrical launcher. Everything in sight was being blown to pieces. Rockets exploded continually, creating mushroom clouds. The metal ground, and the dragonflies were being sundered in equal measure, as bodies and metallic chunks were strewn across the region in a mind-blowing display of carnage. Over the wreckage and corpses drifted fire, smoke, and dust. The red shadow was like a crazy killer. It moved forward steadily as it fired rockets, reducing the whole place to ruin and rubble. On the shoulders of that crazy red shadow was what looked like a 6-year-old girl. She seemed curious, and she kept looking around. Her calm expression was a ridiculously stark contrast to the insanity of the explosions destroying everything around them. Sponsored Content Han Sun. Yuya and the Sky Palace students, upon seeing the shape of the body more clearly, began to cheer. They thought Han Sun had been murdered by the white metal beast, which had appeared to single him out. But instead of being killed, he showed up when they needed help the most. Seeing that Han Sen's rockets could blow up both Marquis and Duke xenogeneics, it was obvious that his power had increased in the time they had spent apart. It appeared to them as if he must have reached Marquis' class. Otherwise, there was no way he could have brought harm to those beings. Han Sun had intended to rejoin the Sky Palace team when the storm ceased, as he wanted to remain in the cave and drink as much of that metal xenogenic fluid as he could. But the Sky Palace students were in danger, and so he decided he had no choice but to leave the Metal City. This guy, did he just become a Marquis? When Dragon 9 saw the strength of those rockets, he froze up stiff. He could not believe a Marquis could possess such power. Dragon 8 was shocked as well. He wouldn't even dare to try to withstand one of those rockets, even with his gold dragon body active. It was really difficult to believe that a Marquis possessed such power. And on top of all that, the attacks were long-range and area of effect. They weren't single-target attacks only. Seeing the dukes that Han Sun was knocking out of the sky, Khan's face looked ashen. What frightening power! And it's coming from the body of someone that is only a Marquis? If he had become a Marquis sooner, perhaps he could have fought against Dollar and Lone Bamboo. What is his Geno art? What makes him so powerful and scary? Across the whole universe, I am afraid that Mr. Han has to have the most impressive Geno art by a wide margin. Not even Dollar or Lone Bamboo would be able to fight him. A Buddha Marquis whispered in awe. Everyone listening actually agreed with what the Buddha Marquis had said. That power was something they had never expected to see from a Marquis. Even if Dragon 8 used his Evil Breaker dragon powers to summon his maximum strength, it wouldn't compare to the power of each of those rockets. The scariest thing about this, though, was the attack being an area of effect. The power was so strong, it was difficult to believe it all came from a Marquis. Under Han Sen's attacks, the fearless xenogeniacs started to shake and shiver. Han Sun was like a walking cannon, merrily killing each and every xenogeniac he could see. Even dukes were being blown up with ease, all by the might of those explosions. Sponsored content boom. Boom. The whole ground trembled. The xenogeniacs were squealing. The explosions were sounding from everywhere across the land. If there was ever a matter a rocket could not solve, he'd just use another. Boom. Han Sun held his rocket launcher like a minigun. He kept firing at the swarm, and the shockwaves and clouds melted the xenogeniacs in the throttling haze. Marquis xenogeniac hunted. The killing announcements kept overlapping. It was all mixed up, and Han Sun couldn't properly discern what was being said. This wasn't just the power he had gained when Spell became a Marquis. This was Han Sen's power combined with the Break 6 Skies art he had just learned. Han Sen's power was scary, there was no doubt. He was definitely the best out of all the Marquises now. And the impacts he could deliver via Break 6 Skies could enable him to kill everything that was coming at him. He felt as if he could destroy a galactic warship. When Spell became a Marquis, Han Sun had nothing to do. So, he spent the remainder of his free time researching Break 6 Skies. His Dongxian Sutra and deified spectacles made Break 6 Skies incredibly simple for him to learn. Han Sun used a couple of tricks of his own too. Not even he could handle the full extent of Break 6 Skies at close range. So he infused their powers with Spell's projectiles. Firing them from a distance would not hurt him. Sponsored content, so this was the perfect marriage. The rockets and the bullets had the power of Break 6 Skies. Although Han Sun had only learned the first tier, his rocket launcher was already very strong. Not even a duke could withstand it. The rocket's power suppressed the whole xenogeniac army. Dragon 8 and Yuya moved to help Han Sun, but they soon stopped. They just stood back and admired Han Sen's handiwork. Ruins, bodies, and smoke were all that was left in his wake. The whole xenogeniac host had been blown to pieces by Han Sun. He gave an evil chuckle. Everything around Han Sun was exploding. Everyone was thinking, this guy has destroyed more than those fucking destroyed did. It's like he is one of the destroyed. The xenogeniacs were running now. The whole place was like a graveyard in the middle of hell itself. Han Sun held his rocket launcher casually, the little girl still perched upon his shoulder. He approached the Marquises from the ruins. Dragon 8 and the others felt a large chill strike them. They couldn't help but stumble backward. Yuya, are you okay? Han Sun asked, looking over the fighters assembled before him. No. Yes. I mean, we are okay. Yuya was too shocked to answer him appropriately. His brain had lagged for a moment. but it slowly started to function again, now that he had been asked a question. Teacher Han, your Geno art is too cool. White Real blurted out without any self-consciousness. That was awesome. This skill is invincible. He blew up Dukes. This is crazy. If Teacher Han is a marquise, Dollar won't be considered the #1 marquise anymore. That's for sure. All the students spoke about this happily. They all referred to Han's son with the teacher title, as all the explosions had been incredibly impressive. They admired him too much to speak, as if they were on the same level. Chapter 2161 Training is over. Sponsored content. The elites of Sky Palace, the dragon, the destroyed, the Buddha, and the demon were still waiting outside of Metal World. 2 months had elapsed by now, and they had yet to see any of their marquises return. As each new day passed without any sign of their students, their moods became darker and darker. They were finally beginning to settle on the painful acceptance that their people might never come back. Something is coming out of Metal World, murmured a dragon that had been keenly watching Metal World. As he spoke, everyone else began to react as well. The elites that were waiting outside of the planet inched closer, staring intently at the magnetic storms that shrouded the surface of Metal World. Someone emerged from the clouds. 1, 2, and then there were more. The dots emerging from the clouds continued to grow until they resolved into familiar faces. Dragon 8! It's Dragon 8! A Dragon King screamed. The elites of the other races reacted the same way when their people emerged from the storm. But as the last of them came through the clouds, the Sky Palace elders looked more ecstatic than ever, while a gradual glumness crept into the hearts of the others. This was because there were more Sky Palace students than the students of all the other races combined. The Sky Palace team was entirely intact, but the same couldn't be said of the others. The other groups were in a sorry state, and even the survivors had sustained grievous injuries. Han's son took Yuya with him to debrief the Sky Palace elders on what had transpired. The elders were delighted to see 100 students all accounted for. Only a little worse for wear. One elder was so exuberantly happy with the results he said, "Good. Well done, you guys. There is no need for you to say anything more. You should go home and take a well-earned rest." Sponsored content. Yes. Han's son, Yuya, and the others were ready to leave alongside the elders. But suddenly, they found themselves surrounded on all sides by the dragon, the destroyed, the Buddha, and the demon. They positioned themselves threateningly around the Sky Palace group, clearly not intending to let them leave. What is this? The leader of the Sky Palace elites, Green Crane Elder, looked at them darkly. The Sky Palace members prepared to fight. A king of the destroyed looked at Han's son and all the others and said angrily, "All these races entered Metal World, and they were obliterated. But you haven't lost a single soul. Have you performed a trick to harm our marquises?" It was understandable why the destroyed king was so angry. Every race except the destroyed had a few marquises return. They had lost their entire team. They were confused and angry, and they desperately wanted to know more about what had transpired on Metal World. The other races weren't filled with the same rage as the destroyed, but they had still lost a great many people. They were still feeling that loss, and they didn't want Han's son and the others to leave so casually. With everyone there to stop Sky Palace from leaving, this was the perfect opportunity to find out what had happened. Once the Sky made it back to their home, negotiating with them would become much more difficult. So, right then and there, all the elites were going to demand some answers. If this was going to happen, it had to happen now. Green Crane Elder chuckled after hearing the destroyed king. "Your people are weak. How is the demise of your people our business?" Sponsored content. The destroyed king laughed grimly and asked, "Are you saying all these races are not as strong as you? Even if that were true, there is no way all our own died of mere circumstance, whereas not a single one of yours was brought grievous harm. If you do not explain the reasons for this, we destroyed, and the others, will not be allowing you to walk away from here." They were obviously hoping for the dragon to support them. The destroyed couldn't stop Green Crane Elder on their own. Explanation? Sky Palace doesn't owe an explanation to anyone for anything, Green Crane Elder grunted. He had already instructed Han's son and the others not to speak, because he had suspected something like this might happen. Green Crane Elder actually thought the same thing that the other elites did. The Sky Palace Marquises must have done something to the other teams. Otherwise, how could they have returned without losing a single member? While the other teams were in such disarray, Destroyed King bared his teeth and growled, "Don't use the influence of Sky Palace to scare us. The Sky are strong, yes, but none of us here are weak. If you do not give me an explanation, none of you will be permitted to leave." "Mr. Green Crane, why do you not clarify this situation before you leave?" one of the Buddha Kings asked tonelessly. The Dragon King spoke as well. "If the Sky Palace students weren't responsible for any of this, what harm can there be in staying for a little while and providing us with an explanation?" Green Crane Elder frowned, and he started to say something. But before he could speak, Dragon 8, Khan, and the others that had still been making their way up from Metal World arrived. They all moved to their respective kings and spoke quietly with them. Aside from the Destroyed, when the other races heard of what happened, their expressions grew even darker. Sponsored content moments ago, they all had their weapons raised at Sky Palace, but now, their hostility had turned to the Destroyed. "Destroyed, it looks like you all are the ones who need to explaining yourselves." A Dragon King looked at the Destroyed with icy eyes. The other races were giving them severely unfriendly looks. The Destroyed were confused, as they suddenly had no idea what was going on. Green Crane Elder asked Han Sun and Yuya to explain what had happened. After he heard it all, he was left in shock. His mouth hung wide. He was not shocked that the Destroyed had betrayed and ambushed the other races, but he was shocked to hear that Han Sun had fought off all those Xenogeneics alone and saved everyone in the process. Every Marquise that had gone there was supposed to be an elite, especially the likes of Dragon 8, Dragon 9 and Khan. Despite their impressive powers, they were unable to fend off the Xenogeneics. Han Sun, on the other hand, had beaten those same Xenogeneics by himself. It was a very scary thing to think about. Invincible was the perfect term for someone like Han Sun. Although the dragon and the others couldn't believe Han Sun was that strong, there were many Marquises there to verify the story. Their own people had no reason to exaggerate Han Sun's power in the tale, so they had no choice but to believe the story. After this, Han Sun was being talked about everywhere. Whoever heard the story knew now that Sky Palace was the home of two very prestigious individuals. One was Lone Bamboo, and the other was Han Sun. Because the deified metal beast still lived on the planet, everyone gave up on the idea of claiming Metal World for themselves. And as for how they all planned on dealing with the Destroyed, Han Sun did not know. Because Han Sun brought all of the Sky Palace members back alive, he was rewarded by Sky Palace. But none of that actually mattered to Han Sun. The deal between Isha and Sky Palace was for Han Sun to reach Marquis status. Now that Han Sun was a Marquis, his studies with them were over. He now had to return to Narrow Moon. After all, he was not a true heir of Sky Palace. Sky Palace could not offer the resources he needed to get him up to Duke. Chapter 2162 Ocean Monument sponsored content. Before Han Sun went back to Narrow Moon, he had some things to wrap up in Sky Palace. Half a month after his returning from Metal World, Han Sun finished all his outstanding business issues and went to meet with the Sky Palace leader. "Go. Leave your name upon the Ocean Monument. Wherever you go, remember you have Sky Palace to call a home," said the Sky Palace leader. The Ocean Monument was very large, so it had room for many names. Sky Palace had many famous members that were recorded there. When their practice ended in Sky Palace, they were permitted to leave their names upon the Ocean Monument. That way, people would forever know that they had been members of Sky Palace, and they had lived in that amazing place. Isha had left her name on the Ocean Monument, and now it was time for Han Sun to add his. This was always the last act a person would perform as a student of Sky Palace. When Han Sun went to the Ocean Monument, many Sky also went to watch. The people of Sky Palace had a lot of mixed emotions upon seeing Han Sun journey to the monument to leave his name behind. Han Sun was a very smart and unique person. Sky Palace was home to many geniuses, but he was the only one that could equal Lone Bamboo. Not everyone had that level of honor or talent. A lot of people thought it was regrettable that Han's son was so good. He had so much more difficulty gaining rank than others did, and everyone could see that. Sponsored content with his difficulty in leveling up. It was hard to say if he would ever reach king class. It would be a shame if he never made it that far. Others, however, found that thought pleasant. They were happy that Han's son had great difficulty when it came to leveling up, and they hoped that becoming a duke took him as long as possible. The Ocean Monument was a floating island that hung amidst the clouds of Sky Palace. The entire island was a single mountain, standing 10,000 meters tall. The Black Mountain was an intimidating sight. It hung in the air like a sword perforating the sky. The mountain was a piece of history, as its entire surface was scrawled with a great many markings. People had left their names, sword marks, carvings, and even paintings on its rocky slopes. Sky Palace did not restrict what a departing student could leave behind on the monument. Before they left, they could draw or leave anything they wished as a lasting testament to their legacy in Sky Palace. It was something for people to remember them by, but leaving behind a name on the Ocean Monument was a very hard thing to do. The mountain's name came from the material it was made from, ocean stone. Like a vast ocean that hid a little of everything within its depths, ocean stone could absorb the properties of many elements. Using power upon an ocean stone didn't have much effect, because the stone quickly grew a natural resistance to whatever power was used against it. Leaving their name behind would be a headache for an ordinary marquise. Many travelers had left sword marks on the mountain's surface because they lacked the power to leave their whole name upon it. So a mark would be left instead of their name. Sponsored content. There were many elites that were able to leave their entire name upon the ocean stone, of course. Some of the greatest were even able to carve a poem into the stone. There were some even greater exceptions, too. The peak of the mountain was once as sharp as a needle, but 4 meters of the peak had been sliced off. It was Isha who had done that, when the time came for her own departure. It was proof she had been a student of Sky Palace, at one point in time. That part of the stone was later brought to Narrow Moon by Isha herself. On Planet Blade, she placed the thick stump of mountain carefully in her garden. She called it My Little Ocean Mountain. Han's son observed the ocean monument before him, and he thought he should bring a souvenir home for himself, since Isha had done the same. Should I take the peak back with me? Han's son stroked his jaw as he eyed the peak. Isha had already cut off the sharpest point of the peak. The base of her cut was now a flat top that was around 8 meters wide. With the toughness of the ocean stone, cutting it would be a difficult task. When Isha left, she left as a duke. But right now, Han's son was only a marquise. He was very weak compared to Isha. And even if he used 6 break skies, he'd only be able to remove a little. The thought crossed his mind that taking more would make him look bad. He was there to leave behind a memory. He was there to give, and not to steal something like a thief. Han's son thought of himself as a civilized man, so he wasn't going to do something so crude. Sponsored content, but also, he felt as if it would be wrong to leave without really using his talents. Even if he was unable to remove the peak like Isha had, he thought he should at least return with a small stone. Ocean stones were very expensive, and they made for sturdy construction materials in high-end houses. The rooms that were built from ocean stone could not be penetrated by a thief. Even a king-class burglar would also need to exert all their strength to open one. And surely they could be used in other ways as well. A training room and punching bag made from ocean stone would be absolutely perfect for him, he figured. Han's son's mind circled the idea of a training room again and again. With some memory foam, it would be perfect. When he needed to train Geno arts or practice with his friends, he would not have to be afraid of destroying his base. It is just a shame I'm only a lowly marquise. I'm too weak. If I was a king, I could cut the mountain in half and take it back with me. Sky Palace has a lot of resources, and even this mountain is just a monument. I'm sure they'd be okay with me taking half of it, but it is a shame I am too weak for that. I'll probably only end up with a piece large enough to replace one of the tiles on my bathroom floor, Han's son thought. Whatever. I guess I'll just have to take one piece as a souvenir. It's better than nothing, I suppose. Han's son went on to think. And even if I do only end up getting a piece, I should at least try and get as much as I am able to. I only have one chance at this after all. Han's son fell deep into thought, and his eyes suddenly squinted. The black pupils of his eyes became purple, before segmenting into four different petals manifested, blooming to cover his irises. Han's son was looking at the ocean mountain, wondering where it would be best for him to strike. The Sky Palace leader watched Han's son, and as he did, his throat constricted. When Isha left, she had stared at the mountain with the same intensity that Han's son was currently using. Fortunately, he is going as a marquise. If he left as a duke like Isha, I am afraid a big chunk of the ocean mountain would be gone. This way it will only be a small piece, so that's okay. It'll be fine, the Sky Palace leader reassured himself. Han's son looked at the ocean mountain with his right eye, under the effects of the purple-eye butterfly beast soul. The history of the ocean mountain played across his right eye like a movie. Deified beast souls were truly wondrous. It was impossible to fully imagine what using one was like if you never had. In the flashback Han's son was watching, he saw a 10,000-meter-tall chunk of rock forming from a smaller rock. The stone was divided into skin-like layers, which were peeled away one by one. Han's son did not know much about geography, but he knew that stones were not usually formed that way. But the purple-eye butterfly beast soul could not have been giving him incorrect information. Whatever the eye showed him was the truth. Weird. Are ocean stones not really stones? Are they actually plants, perhaps? Han's son wondered. But he didn't think that could be right either. They looked nothing like any plants that Han's son had ever seen. Ocean stones were obviously rock, and if they were alive, then they had to be some kind of living stone. Han's son's mind flicked back to the theory of living stones that Left Crazy had given him a long time ago. But he thought the situation he was dealing with right now was different. Because ocean stones took forever to form, it took a long time for the video to play all the way back to the stone's origin. In the center of the ocean stone, there was a very, very small stone bug that looked rather like a silkworm. That stone bug was living inside a sea of lava, as if it was a calm ocean. Its body rolled slowly through the lava until it decided to emerge. The lava on its body slowly hardened to become a shell of stone. Then, that stony shell would mix with the discharge of the bug's body. Slowly over time the stone began to transform. It became black and shiny like a piece of black jade. When the stone was completely black, the stone bug leaped back into the lava, then rolled and swam through it again. The stone bug kept repeating this process over and over, as more and more stone began to build atop it. As time passed, the rock grew bigger and bigger. The body was initially only the size of a finger, and after a great many years, it became a big stone. The stone shell eventually became too heavy for the stone bug to move by itself. It didn't have the strength to climb out of the lava, and its body just sank inside it. As time passed, the seas of lava kept creating stone layers over it. The stone bug didn't stop releasing its substance, mixing with every new layer of stone it was crusted in. And after billions of years went by, it became an ocean stone the size of a mountain. The whole flashback shocked Han's senator. He couldn't have imagined a little life like that could literally make mountains. It shone a new light of appreciation upon the miracle of life. Life really was truly amazing. This discovery also made Han's son a lot more curious. He did not know what the creature was, but that stone bug had the power to turn molten lava into an ocean stone. I wonder if that bug is still living inside the ocean stone. If it is living, I wonder what it eats to survive. Han's son thought to himself. Han's son had no way of determining this though. The mountain was too thick, and he couldn't sense a life force in the center of the mountain. The chunk of ocean stone would be flawless. It wouldn't have stress cracks like an ordinary mountain. Even if the outside was cracked though, the creature inside wouldn't care. Unless an attacker was stronger than the ocean stone, they wouldn't be able to cut it open. Luckily, the analysis provided by the purple-eye butterfly had given Han's son an abundance of useful information. While Han's son watched the flashback that showed the creation of the stone, he noticed something rather interesting. Although the stone that the little stone bug created looked flawless, Han's son noticed a small hole approximately where the forehead of the stone bug should have been. The hole was so small that Han Sun barely noticed it. Han Sun ran the flashback in reverse and found a small pore on the stone bug's forehead. Do stone bugs need to breathe? If so, what is it breathing in? Oxygen or something like a normal creature? Han Sun thought. He didn't understand, but he was pretty sure that no matter how many layers were added to the stone, that little hole would run through every one of them. But through all the ages the mountain had existed, no one else had noticed that microscopic hole. If Han Sun hadn't used his purple-eye butterfly to look into the past, even with his Dongxian aura, he wouldn't have paid any attention to the hole even if he did manage to spot it. But now that Han Sun had found it, he wanted to know more. He thought about it, and then he walked towards the ocean mountain. Finally, he's moving. I wonder what Han Sun is going to leave upon the ocean monument. Just his name, I wonder? I don't think he will leave behind just his name. For someone like him, leaving his name would be practically lazy. Perhaps he will leave behind a poem or a drawing. Something like that would be more fitting of his identity. Yeah, but what sort of poem or drawing? Have you forgotten that Han Sun uses weapons? I think he is going to leave behind a knife mark. Think about it. If teacher Han Sun left behind a deep knife mark with the sensations of his skills, then we could study it, and our students might become better at knife skills. Wouldn't that be a nice thing? You are right. But if that is the case, then leaving behind a sword mine might be even better. Thousand Feather Crane, the Yun sisters, and First Day Buddha watched Han Sun silently approach the ocean mountain. What will Han Sun leave behind? Yin Si asked under her breath. She knew nothing would ever happen between her and Han Sun, but seeing Han Sun leaving, she still felt profoundly upset. Han Sun has never seemed to seek fame. He will probably just leave his name, or a simple knife mark behind, Thousand Feather Crane said. That is possible. Han Sun is good at everything. So why is he always so withdrawn and lonely? Yun Susang said while nodding. As everyone discussed this matter, Han Sun used his red cloud to head to the top of the mountain. Not long after he reached its peak. The move surprised a lot of Sky Palace's elders, because when Isha left, she had done the exact same thing. He isn't going to copy Knife Queen and remove a part of the peak for himself, is he? Asked the black-masked woman. She stood next to the Sky Palace leader, her head tilted slightly to the side. I bet both of them will do the same thing, the Sky Palace leader grumbled. Thinking that was exactly what Han Sun was going to do, the masked woman laughed and said, Han Sun is strong, but he has only just become a marquise. Knife Queen was a duke when she left, so his attempt will be considerably weaker. And even Knife Queen was only able to cut off a small part of the peak. Now that the peak is 7 or 8 meters thick, even if Han Sun strikes with all of his strength, he will only be able to knock off a small chunk of the stone. Don't worry so much. Sky Palace has much of this resource. Even if I gave him as much as he could take, how much would that really be? This is like an ant taking a swing at a tree. Let him. The Sky Palace leader asserted confidently. The Sky Palace leader couldn't do anything to stop Han Sun from taking whatever he wished to, because it was a tradition for departing students to leave their name on the ocean mountain, or take a chunk of the ocean stone as a souvenir. Han Sun wasn't the only student who sought to do such a thing, and Sky Palace had no shortage of ocean stones anyway. If they did not have so much of the resource, they wouldn't have used one as their ocean monument. And most students, even the best of elites, could only take the tiny bits of stone that crumbled from their carvings on the wall. Isha was the only one who had ever managed to slice off the entire peak. No one else had ever been able to do as she had. Everyone was now looking at Han Sun, as Han Sun remained standing on his red cloud before the peak. He looked down on the mountaintop, but he didn't step down onto it. Han Sun used his Dongxian aura, and the ocean stone became a sequence structure in the eye of his mind. He found that small hole. It's here. Han Sun's heart jumped. He landed atop the peak, and brought out his ghost teeth knife. Han Sun smiled. Since taking a small piece of the ocean stone would be pointless, let's see if the bug within is still alive. Han Sun was interested in learning more about the creature that had made the ocean stone, so he had given up on the idea of cutting the ocean stone itself. He drew his ghost teeth knife and channeled power into its tip. Bao was still sitting atop Han Sen's shoulder, and she observed his knife curiously. Then she looked at the ocean stone. She seemed to understand something, but no one else understood what Han Sen intended to do when he drew his knife like that. Is Teacher Han going to carve some words into the mountain's peak? The peak is good, yes, but no one will be able to see it up there. It cannot simply be writing, surely. People leave words on the wall, but they never do it on the flat surface up top. If he writes his name up there, anyone ventures up top will end up stepping on his name. Han Sen is so smart, so I'm sure he wouldn't be that stupid. If he isn't going to write something, then what is the point going up there? Everyone was confused, unable to guess what Han Sen was planning. Even the masked woman next to the Sky Palace leader frowned. What is he doing? If he wants to cut the ocean stone, that isn't good a position to do it from. The angle is all wrong for cutting. The Sky Palace leader frowned as he looked at Han Senator. Something seemed amiss. Han Sen was just a marquise, so there was no way he could make a cut all the way down into the stone from that angle. Yin Sui and the others looked at Han Sen with curiosity. They didn't know what he was going to do either. Han Sen gripped his ghost teeth knife tighter and tighter. Han Sen had learned to gather up power from the dragon, and he had honed his ability to make very small knife silks. So he prepared to fire them. He directed the knife silks to shoot down into that incredibly small hole. If that stone bug was still alive, it'd react if the knife silks came into contact with it. Of course, Han Sen did not plan on killing it. He was just trying to get a sense of where the stone bug was. If the silks touched the bug, it was sure to move. It wouldn't be killed. Han Sen was confident in his control of the knife silks. But the ocean mountain was 10,000 meters tall. Even if the stone bug was dead in the center, it would be thousands of meters away. Not just any marquise could send a knife silk that far. Han Sen was skilled with both moon and yin-yang blast. If he hadn't been, sending it that far would have been impossible. But Han Sen wasn't extremely confident, so he sent all his focus into his work. He threw ghost teeth knife into the ocean stone to leave his mark. That was to be his memory. Everyone watched as Han Sen stood atop the peak, both of his hands gripping ghost teeth knife tightly. The knife was pointed down, and a strange black and purple knife light was glowing across its blade. It was like there was a demon roaring from the knife. Han Sen's power was raging through him. He used all his strength, channeling everything he had into his hands, as the tip of the knife rammed down into the small hole. Catcha! Power surged down, and ghost teeth knife slid into the stone, sinking up to the hilt. Han Sen kneeled there, with his hands still gripping the handle. He maintained his position and did not pull out. He was still. Everyone was shocked. The knife remained handled deep in the stone. A normal marquise would have no chance of stabbing a knife into that stone. Even getting the knife a few inches deep would have been impossible. That knife was fiercely strong, but given Han Sen's reputation, it was still less than what the observers had expected of him. The Sky Palace students thought Han Sen would do something impressive with the knife in his hand. They thought he would draw or write something, but Han Sen did not move. Normal people couldn't see what was actually happening though. Han Sen's strike sent the knife silks down into the hole, and they were traveling deep into the mountain now. This was a unique technique, and making the silks smaller than that hole was a very demanding task. As the knife silks continued down into the hole, he knew he couldn't risk allowing them to touch the stone. If that happened, the power would come to an immediate standstill. Directing the silks flawlessly down thousands of meters of narrow tube was something very few in the entire universe could do. Plus, the hole had formed naturally, not cut with a laser. It wasn't perfectly straight. If the knife silks touched the crooks in the hole, it'd be game over. Without Han Sen's ability to sense things and his amazing control on the silks, he'd never have been able to send them where he wanted to. Han Sen continued to grip the handle of the knife as he knelt motionless. He was frozen. Controlling the knife silk took every ounce of his concentration. If he did not focus on the knife silks, they would hit the mountain instead of traveling the thousands of meters he needed them to. Han Sen's refusal to move made people rather confused though. The Sky Palace leader eventually seemed to notice something, and his eyes went a little wide. What is that kid doing? Many of the Sky Palace students wanted to know the same thing. They fervently discussed his behavior between themselves. This cannot be over surely. He only left one mark? I thought this would be exciting, but he just left behind a single mark. What profound meaning will that have? Why didn't he choose to draw something instead? Yeah, I've been waiting for this for so long. All the students were disappointed. After all, the ocean mountain was a way for departing students to show off their power. The students thought they would see something truly remarkable, but it appeared to be over after a single hit. Catcha! As the Sky Palace students continued to talk with each other, a crisp noise sounded from that mountain. It was as if a stone had cracked. Everyone immediately went quiet. They looked towards the ocean mountain, where they saw Han Sun in that same position. He was kneeling and holding the knife handle, and he didn't appear to have moved at all. The ocean mountain seemed to be fine too, which rather disappointed the students. They had initially believed the noise to be the sound of Han Sen's knife moving. Catcha! Another noise came, and again it sounded like stone being broken. This time, everyone heard the sound, and they were able to tell that it was coming from the point Han Sun had plunged his knife into. Everyone looked over there, but most of the observers didn't have good enough eyesight. Han Sun was a great distance away, so it was difficult for them to discern much. But the Sky Palace leader, the masked woman, and Yun Changkong saw there were two small cracks near where the mountain and the handle of the blade were now connected. That crack extended from the point in which the knife had been driven through the stone. It was as thin as a single strand of hair, and it couldn't have been more than 10 centimeters long. It wasn't particularly eye-catching, but its presence made their faces grow pale. In a jade city, Yu Shanqin suddenly stood up from feeding his dog Old Wang. He walked over to the city's tower, and from its top, he stared at the ocean mountain's peak strangely. On Dream Island, the dream beast had been sleeping, but now, from the bushes, he opened his dreamy eyes and looked over to Ocean Mountain's peak as well. What is it? Why is there the sound of a rock cracking? I think Han Sun must have cracked a little of the rock around him. That should be expected. Given that this is Han's senator, of course, he can crack the ocean stone with his level of power. Catcha! Catcha! As everyone resumed their discussion, the breaking noise returned. It grew louder and louder each time it was heard, and the frequency of the booms increased. It made everyone stop breathing. They all looked towards the peak, keenly curious about whatever was happening. Catcha! Catcha! That breaking noise was getting louder and louder. Some of the students with strong eyesight could now see the crack that extended from his knife. It was spreading. It is no wonder. This is Teacher Han. He has very strong teeth powers. He can even break ocean stones. Yes, that is a powerful ability. I knew Han Sun wouldn't just do one simple strike. He is going to leave a visible crack across the mountain. It is such an incredible ripping power. There will surely be a teeth knife mine left behind, and we can go see it when Han Sun is done. The people that practice with knives are certainly in luck. Catcha! The breaking noises were getting stronger, and it was as if the mountain was being repeatedly rocked by thunder. The noises were so loud that they made people's ears hurt, but it was more of a shock to their hearts than their ears. Everyone stared at the peak of Ocean Mountain in awe. From where Han Sun had inserted his ghost teeth knife, the crack had spread 10 meters down either side of the mountain, dividing it in two. The scariest thing was that the crack was now extending all the way down the mountain, accelerating as it went. Even Han Sun was sliding down with it. Catcha! With a sound like cannons going off, the giant mountain was split in half. The crack had been devastating. Everyone was frozen by what they saw. The sight of Han Sun hanging in the air, still clutching his ghost teeth knife, was mesmerizing. The giant mountain was cut in half beneath his knife, while he slid down effortlessly with it. The Sky Palace leader, the masked woman, and all the elders were frozen. They stared blankly as the ocean mountain crumbled. Ho! Ho! Holy shit! Are my eyes working correctly? Han Sun cut down Ocean Mountain. A student thought his eyes were going to pop out of their sockets. It was a struggle to even speak. I must be sleeping. This has to be a dream. This could never happen to Ocean Mountain. I must be dreaming. I must be dreaming. Old Wu slapped me. Wake me up. Pow! Ouch! You really fucking hit me. All of the elders came forward, racing to the sides of the broken mountain. They used their scary powers to grab hold of the mountain that was now in free fall. Ocean Mountain had always floated in the air, because it was perfectly balanced. Now that it had been cut in half, it had lost that balance. And so it slipped and fell. The elders reached out with their powers to grab the mountain, but because of the qualities of ocean stone, they couldn't get a good grip on it. The crippled mountain continued falling with a crescendo of noise, and there was little that the kings could do to stop it. There was no way they could hold even half of it. Han Sen did not expect one strike would have such dramatic effects. He swore he had only sent his knife silks down that little hole. When they came into contact with the bug, Han Sen realized the bug was still alive, and so he pulled back. He had no clue this was going to transpire. Boom! The two ocean mountains fell, and as they toppled through the clouds rose and spilled everywhere like a tsunami. The rush of clouds washed over many floating islands. Animals were scattering everywhere in fear, while items were blown about everywhere. Sky Palace had been swiftly thrust into chaos. Fortunately, the clouds were not harmful. They tossed around light items, but they didn't injure anyone. This is cheating. Many students awoke from their daze, and they all stared at Han Sen in bewilderment. The Sky Palace leader actually looked furious. That bastard. Toss him out of Sky Palace. I never want to see him ever again. Han Sen sat on a ship departing Sky Palace, bound for Narrow Moon. He hadn't been allowed to take half of the ocean mountain with him, but the Sky Palace leader permitted him to keep a bunch of ocean stones. Han Sen would usually take a public passenger ship, but on this day, he was riding a cargo ship. Loading it with ocean stones took a while, and the people of Sky Palace who passed by couldn't help but stare at the bounty. Students usually took items and gear with them when they left Sky Palace, but they had never before seen a student embark on a cargo ship fully stocked with ocean stones. The stones weren't close to half of the mountain Han Sen had sundered, but it was more than enough masonry to build an entirely new base. Because of that, Han Sen was quite satisfied. The story of Han Sen destroying the ocean mountain quickly spread to each and every corner of Sky Palace. The Sky Palace leader and the elders quickly came to investigate what had happened, and they supposedly learned that the ocean mountain already had a crack. The incredible results weren't because of Han Sen's raw strength. Instead, Han Sen had taken advantage of an existing fault. Even so, the tale of Han Sen sundering the entirety of Ocean Mountain was a popular one. It was a frequently discussed topic, and it would soon become a legend. Many years later, when students departed Sky Palace, they would leave their names, or a mark of their presence, by scrawling them onto half of a floating mountain. It was easy to imagine them asking what had happened to make it like so. The Sky Palace people would sound very proud when answering, telling the newbies how someone had once managed to cut the ocean mountain in half. Han Sen, and that half of an ocean mountain became something for the history books of Sky Palace. Han Sen knew Ocean Mountain hadn't been previously cracked though. It split open because of the stone bug residing within. But when Han Sen was breaking the ocean mountain, the situation had been too messy for him to get a look at it. And as a result, he hadn't actually seen the stone bug with his own eyes. And although he tried to use his Dongxian aura to find where it had gotten to, it had vanished. It was nowhere to be found. I wonder what the level of that strange creature was. Perhaps it was deified. As Han Sen thought about this, Bauer suddenly summoned her little gourd. Han Sen thought that was odd. Bauer rarely summoned her gourd willy-nilly, and he hadn't a clue why she had summoned it now, all of a sudden. Amidst Han Sen's confusion, Bauer shook her gourd. She slapped its bottom, and when she did, something fell out of it and landed on the table. Han Sen saw it, and when he did, he was both surprised and happy. A stone bug that looked an awful lot like a silkworm flopped out of the gourd. It was the one that had resided inside Ocean Mountain. No wonder I was unable to see the stone bug. Bauer had taken it. Han Sen watched Bauer curiously poke the body of the stone bug. The stone bug raised its body, but it did not have any limbs, and Bauer's fingers kept it constantly moving. It couldn't resist the push of her fingers. That was unexpected. That stone bug had produced the stone mountain. But despite that, It did not seem to be all that powerful. By the looks of things, it did not even have the strength of a baron. Planet Eclipse has an active volcano. Maybe I can throw this thing into it and see if it can generate more ocean stones, Han's son thought to himself. Bao was still playing with the stone bug. While she did, Han's son went to find more information on ocean stones and the stone bugs that produced them. The biggest place that stored ocean stones was Purgatory Rock Sea. It was a strange xenogeneic space that was composed almost entirely of lava. Sometimes islands would appear in the midst of the lava, and those islands were composed of ocean stones. But Purgatory Rock Sea had many fire xenogeneics to contend with too. Many of the xenogeneics were king class, and some were even deified. Going there in pursuit of ocean stones was a dangerous job. The death rate for those that went there was very high. Ordinary people would only be able to find bits of pre-shattered ocean stones. Only deified elites could bring back a whole mountain's worth, like the one Sky Palace had possessed. Han's son was able to learn much about the ocean stones, but surprisingly, he was unable to learn anything about the stone bugs. It seemed as if no one knew how ocean stones were created. No one had seen one of those stone bugs before. Han's son had a look at the ocean stone bug. After Bauer annoyed it for a while, it stopped moving and played dead. It realized that the more it resisted, the happier Bauer would become. After it decided to stop moving, Bauer's interest in the creature quickly disappeared. Han's son observed the stone bug closely. Its body was like gray rock. It felt warm to the touch, and that was it. Its life force was not very strong, so Han's son was unsure how it had managed to break the ocean mountain as it had. Han's son let Bauer put the stone bug back in the gourd. He was going to experiment more with it once he visited the volcano. If he took the critter to an environment like that, something might happen. The ship was guarded by a number of Sky Palace's elites. Han's son was delivered back to Narrow Moon safely, with the ship packed to the gills with ocean stones. On a primal planet covered with many cruel creatures, a man stood holding a knife. All the creatures that went by him were killed. No bones were left after their death, as the knife consumed them whole. That knife was strange. It was made from bone, and shaped like some creature's spine. The knife was serrated like teeth, and it was around 2 meters long. But when the man swung it, it killed any cruel creature that it came against, and all of the beast's flesh would be absorbed into that bone knife. The blade appeared more and more bloody as the creatures died. The man that gripped that bone knife looked a little strange as well. His head had 3 faces like a destroyed, but he only had 1 pair of arms, and those 3 faces looked very different from a destroyed. The average destroyed had 1 bird head in the center, with the faces of a man and woman on either side. But this man's 3 faces all looked like men. The center face was emotionless. The left one looked like a ghost, and the right one looked handsome. The man kept killing, his expressions never looking bored or annoyed. Countless lives were harvested by his bone knife, but his emotions did not change once. While the man was killing, his beautiful face looked up to the sky. A ship breached the atmosphere and came down to land near him. A robot departed the ship and walked in front of the man. Bar. Someone is willing to offer you a high sum to kill Knife Queen's student. Will you accept this contract? The robot made some electronic noises. You know the rules. The man named Bar continued to kill as he spoke. He cut a creature in half with his bone knife right then and there. The teeth-life blade went on to munch on the body, and eventually the knife swallowed it up. The bone knife looked even stronger after that. Its red color had grown even darker. This video should be sufficient. I assure you that this target is worth your time. The robot proceeded to display a video of Han. Senator Bar watched it, and he was attracted by what he saw. A short time later, his eyes flashed and he said, I will accept this task. Han's son returned to Narrow Moon, where he was kept busy for the next few days. When all that was sorted out, he went back to Planet Eclipse. The base was as he had left it, with Zero, Han Linger, Little Angel, and Isha looking after the place. Consequently, Planet Eclipse was doing fine on the whole as well. While Han's son had been gone, Zero, Little Angel, and Han Linger were able to level up to Marquise. That was largely due to the abundance of rich resources Planet Eclipse offered. There were many xenogeniacs on Planet Eclipse, but the highest ranked were only dukes. And there weren't many of those around. It'd be difficult for them to become dukes themselves with so few xenogeniacs to hunt. I only have Planet Eclipse. It has proven more than enough for early development, but if I want to go any further, this planet isn't going to be too enough. Han Sun was troubled, thinking of the limitations posed by the finite resources. It wasn't just Han Sun that needed resources. Everyone else did too. And if there weren't any more resources available, he couldn't bring anyone else from the sanctuary. But most of the planets in the Geno universe were taken by someone or other, and the relationships between the factions were very complex. When someone claimed a territory, they could draw the attention of many factions. Going to the Baron system wouldn't be easy either. Anyone who wasn't escorted by powerful elites could be attacked by the scary creatures of such a place. Even if he successfully claimed a place there, it could be taken away by force if he didn't have the protection of a big faction. Han Sun was in an awkward position right about now. He couldn't get a hold of any more resources, and the resources available to him on Planet Eclipse were not enough. Han Sun mulled over this for a while, but he failed to come up with a viable solution. Han Sun leaned back from his computer and rubbed his head. Seeing the ocean stone bug playing with Bauer, Han Sun suddenly remembered that he had wanted to experiment with it. He took the stone bug and Bauer to a nearby volcano. The ocean stone bug's attack power was practically non-existent. Keeping it with him would be pointless, so when Han Sun entered the volcanic zone, he set the bug down near the lava. The stone bug saw the lava, and when it did, its eyes brightened as it immediately rolled forward. Splash! The stone bug fell into the lava, and not long after, it was covered in a layer of lava. After a while, the lava cooled and turned into stone. When the stone turned black, the stone bug rolled into the lava again. It kept repeating this until it was a plump ball that was around the size of a hand. Han Sun wasn't in the mood to watch much longer though. At that speed, God knew how long it might take the bug to create another ocean mountain. I'll wait until it grows bigger before taking the ocean stone. Han Sun left the stone bug there and returned to the base with Bauer. When he arrived at the base, Han Sun was shocked to find Isha sitting in the plaza. All the creatures were there waiting on either side of the plaza, as if a queen was visiting. My queen. Han Sun bowed. His mind raced through possible explanations for why she had come to visit him on Planet Eclipse. Isha looked at Bauer, who was holding Han Sun's hand, and stood up. Take a walk with me. I want to see how much you have learned over the past few years. Han Sun thought to himself. I haven't been around here for the past 2 years. You know Planet Eclipse better than I do, so it's not like you need to inspect what I've done with the place. Han Sun might have thought those things, but he would never dare to speak them out loud. He led her on a short tour of the base and its surroundings. They approached Mirror Lake, and while Han Sun was describing that place to her, Isha suddenly interrupted him. Han Sun, have you heard stories of the rebate Alpha? I have only heard a little, Han Sun answered after a brief moment of thought. He wasn't interested in the rebate, and so he hadn't spent much time exploring their history. But during his time in Narrow Moon, he had indeed heard some stories about the rebate Alpha. After all, an Alpha was the pride and identity of any race. Isha kept walking, and she said, the rebate are a higher race, but compared to the long stretch of history, we are also a fairly new race. We cannot compete with the older high races. It was incredible luck that we gained an Alpha such as that, who was able to lead us to where we are today. Do you not know about her history? I have heard she possessed the blood of an even more ancient race, Han Sun answered. Isha laughed. That's just the story that other races tell. Over time, we have come to start believing it ourselves. After a pause, Isha went on to say, our Alpha was a slave. Our race used to be a primal society, and we couldn't even get off a single planet. We didn't know anything about fighting or practicing Geno arts. Then a higher race descended on our planet and took us away to be slaves. Sometime after, our Alpha started to travel around the galaxy, collecting skills and strength. After many great trials and difficulties, we were able to light the lantern and become one of the higher races that many cannot help but envy. But do you know what she did then? She must have been really talented. And she accomplished all that through her own efforts? Han Sun thought a little bootlicking on his part would be appropriate here. Isha smiled and said, "Back then the rebate were just another race. And our alpha was just an ordinary being as well. When she started practicing, she only had Geno armor. And then, she managed to claim a xenogenic fruit that let her ascend and become a baron. This kind of talent is very common in the universe. There are probably millions of people like this out there. If that is the case, then your alpha must have been a very patient person. She had more intelligence and patience than ordinary people," Han Sun told her. Isha shook her head. She might have been smart, but she was not fond of suffering. She liked to sleep, and she liked long baths. She created teeth power because she was lazy. She liked to finish things with one hit, without needing to attack again. Han Sun did not know what to say, because the rebate alpha was now being portrayed as a very normal woman. But for a normal woman like that to have escaped a slave planet and led her race to light a lantern, that was incredible. Are you curious why our alpha gained such talent with that personality? How such a lazy person managed to raise her race up to loftier heights and bring the rebate into the Geno Hall? Isha smiled at Han Sr. "I am curious," Han Sun answered honestly. Isha's expression looked conflicted. "My alpha didn't get that far on her methods and talents alone. She depended on the Extreme King." Extreme King? One of the top 3 lanterns in the Geno Hall? That Extreme King? When Han Sun heard the name, he was surprised. He thought Narrow Moon depended on Sky Palace for protection, but hearing her say this, that didn't seem quite so likely. Isha nodded and said, "It was the Extreme King that first landed on planet Rebate and took us as slaves. Our alpha was raised by a famous member of the Extreme King, and so that is how she garnered so many resources and achieved what she did." Han Sun's face kept changing. Sky Palace, Dragon, and the Destroyed were in the top 10. The Demon and the Buddha were in the top 100. But the truly powerful races were the top 3 of the Geno Hall. The top 3 were stronger than any other race. Not even Sky Palace, in all their might, could challenge them. In the Geno universe, most of everything was split between those top 3 races. All of the factions were sub-factions of the 3 of them, in some capacity. Extreme King was the 3rd. But right now, they were the best-known race in the entire universe. The first 2 races were quite mysterious. They were almost never seen, and no one knew where they lived. One of them was a complete loner race that never allied with anyone else, and kept to themselves. They never allowed outsiders into their midst, and they never accepted new members. Someone might occasionally be allowed to work with them, but that was exceedingly rare. Big factions like Sky Palace were connected with the first race. It was called Very High, but Very High was also very mysterious. It was rare to see their people, and very few could actually interact with them. There were rumors about the Buddha having an association of some kind with the Very High, but so far, that was just a myth. No one knew any of the specifics. The likes of the Dragon and the Destroyed were more connected to the second race. They were called Ancient God. Isha and Sky Palace's relationship was a close one. Han Sun had thought the rebate belonged to Sky Palace, so it was odd to find that they were connected to Extreme King. Isha nodded and said, "Right now the rebate are considered one of the higher races. We have many things, but we still need the support that a race like Extreme King can provide." After pausing, Isha went on to say, "I wanted to tell you this because I need you to know how important resources are. Especially since you are practicing the story of genes. For someone like you, resources are more important than ever. Thank you for telling me this." Han Sun gave Isha a slight bow to show his respect. He knew Isha wouldn't randomly tell him all this. She must have had some plan that involved acquiring resources. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come here. It wasn't as if he needed any bedtime stories after all. "In about a month, I will be going to the Extreme King," Isha coldly said. Han Sun was shocked. "Seriously? When will you get back?" Isha did not answer. She just looked over the glittering surface of Mirror Lake and said, "Everything I have achieved will be for naught if I do not become deified. If I don't ascend, it won't matter if I come back at all. I'll be there for as long as it takes, and I will do whatever I can. As long as the road remains open for you, you may continue on your way." After that, Isha turned around and left. She ignored Han Sun, and after taking a few steps, she disappeared from Planet Eclipse. Han Sun frowned. Isha hadn't actually told him all that much, but Han Sun got the gist of what she meant. Her trip would be very dangerous, and there was every chance she could die whilst on the way. It was a risk she would take for the chance to become deified. Isha's presence had made Han Sun feel very secure during his stay in Narrow Moon. While she was around, nobody would dare to lay a finger on him. The stuff that belonged to him remained with him, and he frequently had the opportunity to take the things of others. But it was difficult to determine how things would go for him, with Isha being absent. If Isha achieved the breakthrough she needed with the Extreme King, that would be wonderful. If she couldn't, and the news found Han Sun, things would take a turn for the worse with him as well. Isha had come to Planet Eclipse to tell him all this, because there was a choice he would have to make. He needed to let go. If he didn't, he'd die. You need to lose something to gain something. That is what she meant. Is she leaving me with everything of hers in Narrow Moon? Han Sun was suddenly overjoyed. With Isha's reputation, she was sure to have an abundance of wealth in Narrow Moon. If he was able to take over all of her things, leveling up to king would not be all that difficult. But Han Sun was Isha's student. According to the rules of the rebate, he wasn't qualified to take over her legacy and wealth. And most of Isha's resources belonged to the rebate. If she died, those resources would be taken back by the rebate and redistributed. Not many things there actually belonged to her. He might have been the next best thing to an heir that she had, but that would matter little. Han Sun didn't even know if he could take control of her personal resources. After all, if she died, the rebate would not want her legacy to fall into the hands of an outsider. Things were never that simple, of course. And before Isha went to the Extreme King, she established plans for Narrow Moon in her absence. But Han Sun was not given any of her resources, so he had little say in what happened to them. It wasn't as if Isha left him with nothing, however. What Isha had given him actually left Han Sun somewhat confused. Cold Palace Guardian. Han Sun mumbled, staring at the white jade tablet in his hands, and he looked confused. The white jade tablet was about the size of a man's hand, and it seemed to have been sculpted from ice. The words Cold Palace Guardian were written across it in red letters. Han Sun knew it had to be an identity card of sorts. Isha had also left him a note explaining the item. It was something he would need to access someplace called Cold Palace. Cold Palace. Is that a place for used boy toys? Han Sun considered that possibility, while his mind brought up images of men dressed in skimpy clothes with faces full of makeup. He thought of them sitting around the house, wiping away their tears. Han Sun started to feel uncomfortable. Ahem. That cannot be it, surely. I have never heard of Isha playing with men before. I will have to go and take a look at Cold Palace for myself. Han Sun shook his head, trying to shake off the strange scenes he had just envisioned. Cold Palace was on Isha's planet, so Han Sun packed up his things and went to Planet Blade. Han Sun would have liked to bring Bauer, but Isha's note stated that only the person holding the tablet would be permitted access. Any other creature would be killed on sight. That made Han Sun very curious about what Cold Palace actually was. Why would Isha want him to become a Cold Palace Guardian? Knife Queen is allowing Han Sun to become a Cold Palace Guardian. That will obviously help him gain the profits he wants. Night River King's icy voice filled an office in full moon. Knife Queen is the Cold Palace Guardian. She has been summoned to the Extreme King. It is only expected that her student should take her place. Black Moon King responded evenly. Only the best of the rebate has been given the mantle of a Cold Palace Guardian. If Knife Queen is no longer able to do it, another king should be selected to replace her. A marquise like Han Sun should be out of the question. Night River King looked at their boss, Moonwheel King. Mr. Moonwheel, do you think we should select a king to replace Han Sun in Cold Palace? Moonwheel King quietly said. Right now, Knife is still in charge of its guardianship. It would be poor form to overrule her decision now. Why shouldn't we? The guardian should be a king. Han Sun is just a marquise. What if something happens? To safeguard the future of our entire race, no one of low rank should take that responsibility, Night River King said. That does make sense, Shadow King said. Flower King did not say anything. He had receded into thought, and that was where he remained. Black Moon King laughed coldly. Night River, you are in too much of a rush. Han Sun is temporarily filling in for Knife Queen. If you force a change now, and she returns, how will you explain the switch? I am Night River. I am not scared of anyone. I only focus on what's best for the rebate. Even if Knife was here right now, I'd be trumpeting the same thing. Night River King boasted. Really? Then why did you not object when Knife first made the suggestion? Black Moon King bared his teeth in a grin. You really think Knife will never return from those chaotic systems? Is that why you are talking so boldly right now? Do not forget that there is every chance she will not be killed. If she returns, she will return deified. And if she returns deified and sees that you have again mistreated her student, you know what her fiery personality will spur her to do. You will be well and truly doomed. I only care about the matters themselves, not the people involved. Black Moon King, do not speak to me so condescendingly. Night River King continued to argue, but he sounded a lot weaker now. If Han Sun is Knife's replacement, the least we can do is let him try. If he does a bad job, then one of you can swap with him. What do you think? Moonwheel King looked at Flower King and the others. Flower King smiled and said, I don't have an opinion. If Han Sun fails as a guardian, I'm not letting it be my fault. Good, Shadow King said. Black Moon King did not have an opinion either. Night River King looked gloomy, but he didn't say anything. 2 days after Isha left, Han Sun arrived on Planet Blade. Snowbird Duke was in charge of the place with Isha absent, and she had been instructed to serve him. When Han Sun saw Snowbird Duke, he was shocked. Snowbird Duke looked almost exactly like Icebird Duke, right down to her cold expression. Icebird Duke was still locked up in Purgatory Heaven where Han Sun had left her. He kept her there to prevent his identity from being leaked, and to stop the secrets surrounding Purgatory Heaven from getting out. So he had no choice but to leave her imprisoned. Seeing Snowbird Duke standing before him now was very strange. Snowbird Duke was very sensitive to such emotions, and she immediately noticed Han Sun's discomfiture. But she misunderstood what was making him uncomfortable. Stop wondering. Icebird Duke is my little sister. I see. That is why you two look so similar. Han Sun then went on to ask, how come I've never seen you before? Before Knife Queen accepted you as a student, I was sent away for work. I returned only a little while ago, so of course we haven't met. Snowbird Duke didn't seem too interested in talking with Han Sr. She simply stood up and said, follow me. Queen told me to escort you to Cold Palace. Han Sun, noticing her brusqueness, did not respond. He simply followed Snowbird Duke to the back door of Cold Palace. Cold Palace is not in the palace? Han Sun asked. No, Snowbird Duke answered emotionlessly. The question had been rhetorical. Han Sun sighed, and continued following Snowbird Duke until they reached a mountain behind the palace. Han Sun was wondering where Cold Palace was when Snowbird Duke stopped just short of the mountain slopes. That is where you need to go. I do not have permission, so my guidance must stop here. Snowbird Duke pointed up the mountain to a waterfall. Nestled beside it was a small stone house. It looked to have been built from rocks, and it was surprisingly short, probably 2 meters tall at its highest point. Looking at the stone door, it seemed that Han Sun would have to bend double just to avoid bumping his head. The old stone house made Han Sun confused though. Is that Cold Palace? Han Sun thought that this little shack surely couldn't be the palace he was supposed to guard. But there was a sign over the door frame that read Cold Palace. Queen said that you must come here on the 1st and 15th of the month to guard the entrance of Cold Palace. You must protect it for a whole 24 hours. Aside from those times, you may do whatever you please. But do not be tardy when you are expected to guard here. After that, Snowbird Duke turned and left. Han Sun had no choice but to hike up to the waterfall alone. The waterfall was pretty, and it was very wide. It felt as if an entire galaxy was descending from the space high above. The sound of surging water was deafeningly loud. But despite that, it carried the wonderful fragrance of trimmed grass. When he neared the stone house, however, Han Sen noticed the temperature drop. It didn't affect him, but it did seem fitting for the title of Cold Palace. It was a sharp contrast to the humidity and heat of the rest of Planet Blade. Han Sen looked at the stone house, but he did not see anything too strange about it. Aside from the lower temperature, it looked like a fairly ordinary house. It looked old and rarely visited, but other than that, it was unremarkable. Why was a stone house like this built here, with not even a fence around it? What could it contain that's actually worth protecting? Han Sen wondered. But today was neither the first day nor the 15th, so there was no point in him being there. He looked back over the way he had come to memorize it, then turned to leave. But just as Han Sen was about to walk back down the mountain, his heart jumped. His body tensed as he looked down the mountain path. Someone was coming up that path, and while he seemed to be meandering along, the power he carried was like a tsunami. Every step he took felt intimidating. It felt like the ground was rumbling beneath him. Han Sen squinted his eyes. That scary presence carried enough overwhelming force to sunder the sturdiest stone. It rolled over the region like a wave. The man was approaching, and he was terrifying. Han Sen felt as if the sky itself had changed color. The man's presence battered him over and over, like a ceaseless tide. "Who are you?" Han Sen stood and squinted, peering at the oncoming form. The wind was tugging his clothes back, making them ripple in the gusts. But Han Sen stood strong. He held his position, as if that power did not exist at all. The person walked onwards without saying a word, and with every step the form took, it sounded like rocks were being broken underfoot. Dong! A very light footstep then took its place, reverberating through Han Sen's ear. But it had the impact of an explosion inside Han Sen's head. It made Han Sen squint his eyes even harder. Dong! 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 The shadow approached closer and closer. The footsteps were like a chain of explosions, going off inside Han Sen's head, one after the next. And along with all that, the person's presence was becoming scarier with every step. Han Sen looked at the body, and he noticed that they were both of a similar height. But in Han Sen's eyes, the person seemed greater than him. He got the sense that the other person was a god that towered over him, making him feel small and insignificant in comparison. Han Sen knew that this had to be an illusion. But even so, if this person could use their powers to such a degree, it was unlikely that an ordinary person could fight against it. Since when does an elite like this exist within the race of the rebate? Han Sen was confused by this presence. The body and its presence were scary, to say the least. But its life force certainly wasn't king class. It was a duke at the most. Still, Han Sen couldn't think of anyone else across the entirety of Narrow Moon that carried an aura such as that, especially as a duke. The person continued approaching, but try as they might to subdue Han Sen with fear, the attempt failed. Han Sen did not move. The person eventually stopped walking at a distance of 10 steps away from Han Senator. She stood where she was, and just looked at him. Now Han Sen could tell that the person was actually a woman. She was clad in black armor and also a helmet. Her face would have been revealed, had it not been for the face mask she wore. The features of her face were covered, save for the beautiful golden eyes that gleamed from her mask. But it was evident how fit the woman was based on the curves that the armor revealed. She was as tall as Han Sen, and so her longs were very attractive. But Han Sen's gaze wasn't drawn to her eyes or her legs. He was actually looking at her left hand. Her right hand was covered in a black gauntlet, revealing only the length of her fingers. Her left hand, however, was bare. The skin of her hands was pure white. Her fingers were slender, and her delicate nails were like crystal gemstones. But Han Sen was not merely admiring the prettiness of it. He looked there because of the power that swirled in her palm. It was a power he could not accurately describe. With no shocking godlight or scary flames, the hand suddenly closed into an elegant fist, and shot toward Han Senator. Han Sen's eyes locked onto the fist that was headed his way. And as the fist traveled to Han Sen, he quivered. He did not shudder in fear though. His twitch was him activating all the power inside him. Han Sen's body gave that single shiver, and all of his power surged up, ready to be unleashed. The pressure he felt from that incoming punch prompted Han Sen to gather up all the power he could. Standing before the black-armored woman, he felt a grave sense of danger. Han Sen had no intention of dodging though. When the punch was swung, it felt as if the entirety of that pocket of space was filled up by it. That fist was everywhere, and it seemed as if there was no place for him to run to, even if he wanted to do so. Naturally, Han Sen was not actually planning to hide. He clenched his right hand into a fist, filled it with the gathered power of his trembling body, then sent a return punch at the woman. The fires that carried the fist were very demonic. They were tinged with scary teeth powers, and they came right at the woman's fist. The fists came against each other, and the power inside Han Sen's fist shattered. The jade fist had collided with Han Sen's own with tremendous force. Boom! Han Sen felt the unstoppable powers coming from that jade fist. It was like a supernova, and the unleashed force hurled Han Sen away. Han Sen used his legs to cleave a trench through the stones and the earth, trying to stabilize himself. But the power that sent him flying was too great. He tore through the ground for a few hundred meters, before crashing into a stone wall that exploded on impact. And while the wall might have been destroyed, Han Sen was still standing. His right hand was injured, and his bones were cracked though. "Who are you?" Han Sen asked the woman again. The woman's fist was so strange. It felt like something entirely indestructible. Even someone as strong as Han Sen could not withstand the force it unleashed. And after Han Sen had taken that punch, he knew for certain that the frightening black-armored woman was actually a marquise, just like he was. That surprised Han Sen more than anything. With this power she wielded, there was every possibility that she was even stronger than Lone Bamboo. That scary punching power was a testament to that. Han Sen thought he might have to retaliate with Break 6 Skies. That could be the only way to combat her fist effectively. "You can withstand my Extreme King final punch? It is no wonder you are regarded as being as good as Lone Bamboo. You have passed." The woman's golden eyes peered at Han Senator. Her voice was icy, but also very seductive. "I will give you a chance to join the knights." "You are of the Extreme King?" Han Sen looked at the woman while he spoke. "Yes," the woman answered. "Did you come all the way over here just to cause me trouble?" Han Sen asked. The woman replied in a toneless voice. "I was here to deliver a recruitment paper for Isha. I was going to leave, but I heard that you were in the vicinity. So, I came to take a look at the individual, who is said to be as strong as Lone Bamboo himself. You have most certainly passed, and so, I extend you an invitation to join the knights." "I'm sorry, but I've made no plans to abandon Narrow Moon." Han Sen was on high alert as he spoke. He was prepared for the possibility that the woman might attack again. But the woman wasn't planning to. When Han Sen declined, she turned around and left. Han Sen watched her fit body as she walked away, her long blonde hair rippling behind her. But the sight was tinged with sorrow, as if to tell Han Sen that he had no idea what he had just missed out on. What an arrogant woman, Han Sen thought to himself. After leaving Planet Blade, Han Sen did not see the woman again. He asked Black Steel about her, and he was told that Extreme King had indeed sent someone there. But aside from Moonwheel King and the other kings, no one had been granted an audience with her. Her identity was still a bit of a mystery to them. Han Sen had a bit of an interest in the entities of Extreme King now, especially after witnessing the punching skill employed by that woman. Their levels and bodies were of a similar capacity, but that punch she unleashed was truly frightening. Han Sen had many Geno arts, but he believed the only one that could effectively combat her was Break 6 Skies. And in regards to using his super spank powers, Han Sen could only use that while he was Dollar. If he used it as Han Sen, he might be recognized. After all, that was like a signature power of Dollar. It wasn't something Han Sen would use on a whim. But ever since that first encounter with the Extreme King woman, Han Sen hadn't seen her again. It was likely she might have left Narrow Moon. Han Sen went to Cold Palace just before the first day of the month, planning to wait there until the next day rolled around. If Isha had asked him to handle this matter, he knew it had to be something special. Due to that, he did not want to risk running late or being careless. Han's son settled himself on the porch in front of the stone house. The porch was clean, as if it had been frequently visited and used. It was far cleaner than the stone house, and it looked as if Isha sat in the same place he was right now when she kept watch over the construct. Han's son sat on the porch and observed the stone door, waiting for 12 o'clock to come. He didn't see anything inside the house. Time passed and eventually the clock struck 12. At that moment, Han's son felt the temperature drop. Han's son looked at the stone house, and he immediately noticed that the chill air was coming out of the house itself. The stone building was releasing a cold air that was actually quite overbearing. No matter how cold it became, though, no frost appeared on the walls. The stone house looked like it always did. The only difference was the coldness it was exuding. As Han's son observed with curiosity, the stone building's door began to open soundlessly back into the house. It revealed a cave-like entrance that was completely dark. When Han's son looked closer, he realized that it really was a cave. There was a cave inside the stone house, and the chill was creeping out of that black space. The chill now swept out in full force, gushing through the open doorway like a tide. It froze the nearby rivers and even the waterfall. The ice crept up the grand waterfall, turning the entire river into a solid chunk. That's a very strong frost air, Han's son thought in shock. The cold palace guardian tablet, which was attached to his waist, had also started to glow. It protected Han's son from the chill draft, separating him from it. Han's son wished to use the cold air to practice jade skin, but the tablet was keeping the chill air from touching him. He wanted to put the tablet away, but all of a sudden, noise sounded from the stone cave. Han's son looked towards the stone cave. It was obscenely dark. Even Han's son's vision could not pierce that impenetrable veil of darkness. But he was still able to hear something moving around in there. Not long after, a body emerged from the dark. It was half a meter tall. Han's son stood there stiffly, trying to guess what it was. Weirdly, the thing looked like a toad made of green jade. A series of red symbols were inscribed across its green back. Its body was very cold, and when it appeared, the temperature fell so fast that it was difficult to imagine. Everything around the beast was immediately covered in ice. The mountains, the rivers, the plants, the trees, and all the animals were frozen. It seemed like space and time had frozen as well. The world became so quiet when the toad appeared that even the wind stopped. Only the cold palace guardian tablet on Han's son's waist was shielding him from that cold power. It allowed Han's son to move as he wanted to. Han's son was shocked though. Is it a deified creature? I didn't know Narrow Moon had a deified creature. Does something this powerful actually serve Narrow Moon? As Han's son pondered its presence, the green toad fully removed itself from the stone house. It looked like a slippery thing as it slid out of the doorway, and turned to look at Han's senator. It noticed the cold palace guardian's tablet, then ignored him. It ventured over to the frozen waterfall. Han's son felt as if he was in a lot of danger. It is fortunate I didn't put the tablet away. I do not know if my jade skin can resist this much cold power. And this thing only seems to recognize the tablet. The fiend would probably kill anyone who wasn't wearing it. That must be why everyone needs a tablet to come here. The jade toad hopped its way beneath the waterfall, and the ice around it began to melt. In the blink of an eye, a small pool of water formed beside the toad. The waterfall remained frozen, so there was no more water coming down to fill the basin. The green toad then dove into the water, and quickly disappeared from sight. Han's son did not know how deep that water was. He could only see the first 100 meters, and he had no idea what lay at the bottom. After the toad sank into the water, no further sign of the creature emerged. Han's son was supposed to be on guard, and he did not know when he could expect the toad to reappear. Isha wanted me to guard this place, but why? So I could watch a toad go for a dip? Han's son pondered this entire scenario, but he couldn't come to any satisfying conclusions. I don't care. I don't know when the deified toad will come back out, so I'll make the most of this, and use the cold air to try to refine my jade skin. Han's son cast jade skin, and his entire body became an icy figure. He then set the tablet down beside him. As soon as the tablet left Han's son's body, he felt the true power of the cold air suddenly pound into him. In no time at all, he knew it would freeze his body and solidify his blood. Han Sen was shocked by the power. His Marquis's jade skin granted him the ability to freeze others, so his resistance to the cold should have been extremely high. But now, he could hardly withstand a single ounce of the chilling power that the toad had unleashed. It was difficult to comprehend. A very powerful deified creature. Before Han Sen became completely frozen, he grabbed the guardian tablet and put it back on his belt. A cold light gleamed across his body and separated him from the cold air. Some of that cold air remained in Han Sen's body though. The guardian tablet's power was like a shield. It was unable to clear out the cold air that was already within him. Han Sen felt very cold, and numbness began to creep through his limbs and into his chest. He quickly used jade skin again, refining the cold air that had invaded his body. The deified toad's freezing powers were unusual. Even Han Sen, with his jade skin, was still being frozen by the ice inside him. Try as he might, he could not remove the frosting from his skin. Without jade skin's cold elemental abilities and great resistance to ice, any ordinary Marquis would have been frozen stiff long before this. Even so, Han Sen felt as if he was going to lose consciousness. He kept casting jade skin as powerfully as possible in a bid to refine the cold air that was afflicting his body. Han Sen cast jade skin again and again, doing his best to refine the cold air invading his flesh. His bones and muscles became transparent, looking very much like jade. While Han Sen was refining the toad's cold power, he realized just how scary the deified toad really was. This was more than the simple cold elements Han Sen was used to dealing with. There was an inclusion of space and time in the mix. This power could actually freeze places in time. Although this was Han Sen's first time seeing something like, he immediately knew how frightening the beast was. Han Sen spent the next 10 hours trying to eliminate the deified toad's cold air, but he was unable to completely remove it. Normal dukes would have died merely attempting to hold off such potent power. After 20 hours, though, Han Sen was finally able to fully remove the cold air. And over the course of that time, he learned a whole lot more about what he had been dealing with. The final realm of ice powers isn't how cold they can be. I used to use jade skin to summon the ice jade skeleton. Now that I think about it, that is the true path of jade skin. Its practice in the sanctuaries is just a smidgen of what it is capable of in the Geno universe. It is like by making preparations ahead of time, things become easier to accomplish in the future. It is easier to complete the path, and it will be easier to go further. I don't know who built the sanctuaries to enable this amazing effect. There was still too much mystery surrounding the sanctuaries. Like creatures in the sanctuary could max out their super genes and gain a super god body. Han Sen's super god body was titled Super King Spirit. Everyone's super body was different, but each one of them was quite spectacular. Any creature that left the sanctuaries with maxed out super genes would have talents that could equal a higher race in the Geno universe, or even better in some aspects. Even though there are no humans, the creatures and spirits that leave sanctuary are sure to be similar to the higher races I've seen populating the Geno Hall. It's scary to think about. Whoever created the sanctuaries must have been quite terrifying. That deified toad had not yet re-emerged from the water. So Han Sen used his deified spectacles to have a look at the cold powers and see what he could analyze. It was quite difficult to analyze the powers of a deified being. The analysis didn't go quickly, but it was progressing. When Han Sen finally got a proper look at them, he understood the ice powers a lot better. On the 24th hour of the first day, ripples and waves began to appear on the surface of the pool. The deified toad came out of the water and headed for the banks of the river. Han Sen watched the deified toad, and when it entered the stone cave, Han Sen turned his attention to the pool itself. Han Sen used his right purple eye to examine the pool. There, Han Sen saw some jade tadpoles swimming around the basin. They were around the size of a fist, and they swam around the water like emeralds. The heirs of a deified creature? Han Sen was quite shocked by what he was seeing. There had to be 30 or 40 of the tadpoles, far more than Han Sun would have expected. If they all grew up, then they'd probably all become deified creatures. It was a prospect that was rather scary to think about. But the Geno universe was different from the sanctuaries. The heirs of a deified creature here would have better blood. But if they wanted to be deified themselves, they'd still need to level up slowly. Becoming deified was not a birthright, as it still required a lot of effort and luck. The deified toad crawled into the stone house, and when it did, the door closed behind it. Meanwhile, the green tadpoles were still flitting madly around the pool. They could not see the deified toad anymore. But even so, they seemed to swim around happily. The frozen river and the waterfall began to melt, and shortly after, they returned to running as they used to. Han Sun finally realized that the task of the guardian was not to safeguard the toad, but to protect the toad's tadpoles. They needed to remain undisturbed while they were floating around in the water. Seeing those tadpoles swimming up the waterfall, Han Sun used his Danshian aura to watch and observe. He was not going to allow any strong creature to appear and eat them. Han Sun was overthinking things though. The rebate had already slain all the powerful creatures that had once existed in the area. No other creature would appear and threaten those tadpoles. Standing guard there all alone was just to ensure the safety of the place. In addition to that, there were benefits to claim. After a short time of playing on the surface, the tadpoles sank further down into the pool until they could no longer be monitored. Is that cold power the benefit that the guardian may take? That doesn't make sense though. Ordinary marquises most certainly couldn't absorb it. And it isn't as if all nobles practice with cold powers either. The true reward cannot be as little as that. There must be something else that I haven't yet found. Han Sun examined the area for a while longer, but he could not discover any further benefits to claim. He eventually left Cold Palace, still suspicious about what he was supposed to claim. Half a month later, Han Sun returned to Cold Palace. The deified toad appeared through the doorway again. This time, when it entered the pool, a group of tadpoles came up to the surface. They traveled up the frozen waterfall to reach the top. The tadpoles wriggled their tails to swim up, and they reached the top alongside the deified toad. They surrounded it, and together, the group observed the countless moons that populated the skies of Narrow Moon. Suddenly, Han Sun saw the deified toad open its mouth. A bunch of full moons came out of its mouth and drifted up into the skies to be with the others. The moons seemed to have symbols that changed. Everything was shining under the strong glow of the moonlight, and eventually, they stopped their drift. The birds in the sky stopped moving too, but they did not fall. It was like they had been frozen in the air. Han Sun had the guardian tablet to protect him. He was not frozen, and he just watched as the moon changed its symbol. Then, the energy inside his body began to shift. When Han Sun's energy started to show movement, a beam of moonlight pierced through the shroud of light that protected him. It went straight into his body like spring water, rinsing all of his cells gently. The tadpoles bathed in the glow of the moonlight, happily absorbing every ounce of the light they were receiving from the moon. Now Han Sun understood how the guardian benefited. When the deified toad spat out moons, everything would freeze. Even the light stilled. The creatures and people around would not know what was occurring, save for the guardian with the tablet for protection. Only the guardian would witness the moons and share the moonlight. The moonlight was very useful for one's body. That was because the moonlight enhanced genes and increased fitness. That sort of growth was very rare but widely beneficial. Even kings had to level up their fitness after all. There was one more benefit that was even better for Han Sun, who was now the guardian. Since he had practiced with ice powers, he could absorb the deified toad's cold air. By doing that, his jade skin would level up far faster. He could use the first day of the month to absorb cold powers, while on day 15, he could bask in the glow of the moonlight. Han Sun's only disappointment was in the fact that the 2 days went far too quickly, and he could only enjoy each of these opportunities once a month. Han Sun wanted to hunt dukes in his free time, but in Narrow Moon, dukes enigenics were very rare. And furthermore, they were mostly under the control of someone or something king class. He couldn't go around killing dukes as he pleased. So Han Sun planned to embark on some missions. By completing the missions, he could kill dukes on the way and collect the duke genes he wanted. Han Sun thought that those genes, aside from leveling up the body's fitness, would also have another use. He just hadn't yet found out what that was. Before Han Sun took the next mission, however, he received some fairly shocking news. A traitor of the Destroyed had fled into the area and gone to hide somewhere in the 6-star xenogenic space. The 6-star xenogenic space was a xenogenic space that belonged to the Rebate. The Destroyed was requesting that the Rebate seal up the 6-star xenogenic space to keep him there. But for some reason, many other races had sent some of their people to the 6-star xenogenic space. They proclaimed they had sent teams to protect their members, who had already entered that xenogenic space. But it seemed as if they were more interested in the traitor of the Destroyed. The teams entered, but they never left. According to outside sources, it was whispered that the traitor of the Destroyed had stolen one of their treasures. That was why there was a big fuss about all this. Because the 6-star xenogenic space was an open business place of the Rebate, many of the races went there. But even though so many teams had entered, quite strangely, the Destroyed traitor had yet to be located. Where he might have been hiding, no one seemed to know. Han Sun was interested in this little affair. He perused what information he was allowed to view, and he came to learn that the 6-star xenogenic space was quite popular right now. Many elites were headed there, and many teams comprised of marquises and dukes went there in an effort to find the traitor. Many king-class elites were sitting outside the place. That was one of the conditions of locking down the 6-star xenogenic space. The Rebate didn't want too many elites poking about the xenogenic space, as they didn't want the news to become too big. That was a xenogenic space belonging to the Rebate, and so if something was to happen, it would be on them. There weren't that many kings anyway, so there weren't many participating in the teams that went in to search. Right now, the 6-star xenogenic space would only allow entry and not exit. The Destroyed really wanted to find that traitor, and they didn't care what it took. Other races tried to search for the traitor too, or find the treasure he had stolen from the Destroyed. What did he steal from the Destroyed to bring the attention of so many different factions? Han Sun wondered to himself. He planned to go to the 6-star xenogenic space to see for himself. But Han Sun wasn't interested in looking for the traitor of the Destroyed. Many factions were already looking for him, and even many marquises and dukes that belonged to Narrow Moon were out in search of him. If Han Sun went in alone, the chances of finding the traitor before everyone else were practically zero. Han Sun was going to the 6-star xenogenic space because it was now open. Even the xenogenics that populated that space were up for grabs. So, Han Sun fancied hunting down some Duke xenogenics to collect their genes. Han Sun messaged Zero, Han Menger, Little Angel, Bauer, Little Invisible, Little Silver, and Little Star, asking them all to meet at the 6-star xenogenic space. When Han Sun arrived, however, things quickly appeared to be worse than he initially thought. Moonwheel King and the other kings were there, and they were controlling the traffic of the elites that were allowed in. The 6-star xenogenic space's interior was a bit of a mess, too, as many of the marquises and dukes that were looking for the Destroyed traitor began to fight. Many of them died in the clashes. Han Sun, this situation is too complex. You should not go, in case something bad happens to you. Black Moon King, who was guarding the exit, tried to convince Han Senator. Although many king-class elites were blocking the way in, there were still many powerful dukes in there. They were a whole level higher than Han Sun, which would make things very dangerous for a marquise. Han Sun appreciated Black Moon King's concern, but he still took Zero, Little Angel, and the others in with him. He had his demon bug by Sema, so not even a king-class enemy was going to scare him. And if they didn't scare him, the dukes certainly wouldn't. He had 4 demon bug by Semes, and Han Sun chose to hold one of them himself. The other 3 were given to Han Menger, Zero, and Little Angel. Bauer and Little Silver were always with Han Sun, so they could share his. The 6-star xenogenic space, in terms of size, was pretty average. That being said, the landscape was very complicated. Aside from the 6 planets that existed there were many asteroids. Finding a marquise inside the asteroid belts would be very difficult. The stories of the traitor Marquise said he was very good when it came to living in space. He could last in space for a few years without needing to eat or drink. So, many of the races compartmentalized their search radiuses and slowly locked down each area in which the traitor might have been hiding. Han Sen did not search amidst the asteroids, though. He brought his companions to one of the planets. The one selected was called Planet Sodi. It had many xenogeneics and many of them were dukes. That was why Han Sen wanted to go there in the first place. People were used to paying large sums of money to hunt xenogeneics on Planet Sodi. But with the mess going on right now, the rebate couldn't enforce the tolls, and so anyone could come and go. Han Sen took his companions there too, saving a lot of money in the process. Han Sen had only just entered Planet Sodi when he was given a shock. Many people had been planning to do the same thing as him. People had spread all over the planet as they hunted xenogeneics. This is obscene. How can they take advantage of a situation like this? Han Sen demanded angrily. He had totally forgotten he was there for the same reason. Han Sen and company walked across Sodi for several hundred miles, and in that distance, he was unable to kill a single xenogeneic. There were too many dukes and marquises already taking advantage of the planet's offerings. Han Sen saw many dukes and marquises fighting and killing xenogeneics before he could reach them. No one was leaving Han Sen a single xenogeneic to fight himself. And if Han Sen drew close to the others, they'd stare him down, as if they were ready to start a fight if he took another step. Han Sen walked forward, hoping to head deeper into the mountains. Han Sen was at the foot of the rise when Qing Li and a number of other rebates approached. Han Sen, are you here to kill xenogeneics? Well, I don't think you'll be able to. I'm just taking a look around. Han Sen coughed. Qing Li lifted her lips. We have been walking across these mountains for over half the day, and we haven't been able to locate a single xenogeneic. Those bastards down there are going to kill them all before we get a chance to. The few rebates of Duke and Marquise class looked tired. Everyone was using the excuse of finding the traitor to exploit the 6-star xenogeneic space. And because of that, the rebate were losing so much. But they had to relent and allow this due to the pressure that the destroyed were putting on them. If that powerful race hadn't been leaning on them so heavily, the rebate would have never let them in. As the two were speaking, however, someone else approached. It was a group of the destroyed. Most of them were marquises, but the leader of the bunch was a duke. That team of destroyed were out in pursuit of the traitor. But when they saw Han Sen, they immediately looked hostile. That was because in Metal World, Han Sen had taken the effort to protect the other races. The destroyed there, however, had been completely wiped out. And after those events, no other race was very fond of the destroyed. Their reputation had taken a tumble, and they had paid a high price. That was why they were not fond of Han Senator, but still, they did not actually try to attack him. They just looked at him with distaste. They were still in territory that belonged to the rebate, after all, and they weren't arrogant enough to fight him there. Just as the destroyed were about to leave, the face of the Duke leader changed. He shouted at the mountains, "Bar!" Han Sen and the others looked in the direction that he had called. They saw a man with bone armor. He was carrying a bone knife that was around 2 meters long on his shoulder. "That is one of the destroyed?" Han Sen asked, looking at Bar with a quizzical expression. Bar had 3 faces, but he did not have the traditional 6 arms. His 3 faces were different than those of the destroyed as well. The 3 faces were all masculine. Qing Li's face changed, and she quietly said, "Do not provoke him. He is, for lack of a better word, abnormal amongst the destroyed." "What is that supposed to mean?" Han Sen quietly asked. Qing Li quickly explained. "He is a mix between one of the destroyed and someone of another race. He is very talented, but also very cruel. The destroyed love violence, but even they call him by the name of Born Destroyer. See how scary he is." A rebate duke quickly told Han Sen, "Let's go. We cannot provoke him. He is also a part-time hitman, and he's killed geniuses that belong to all races. Many powerful people have died by his hand. To me, It sounds like you might be in danger. Han Sun frowned, but he did not move. He had noticed that Bar was already coming after him. Bar's energy had already locked onto him, and he couldn't run. Han Ming'er felt Bar's focus on Han Sun as well. She stepped in front of Han Sun and summoned her death goddess bow. She pulled its string, and a black beam arrow manifested. The arrow tip was trained on Bar. Are you crazy? Put the bow down. Seeing Han Ming'er lift a bow and aim it at Bar, Qing Li and the others started to freak out. A person like Bar would merely murder someone if they were only suffering a bad mood. Han Ming'er was now pointing her loaded bow at him, so they imagined it to be something of a death wish. The group of destroyed were coldly smiling at them, but even though they were of the same race as Bar, there was an element of fear in their faces. They didn't want much contact with Bar either. And now, one of Han Sen's people was aiming a bow at him. The few destroyed started to backtrack a little, so they could comfortably watch the show that was about to unfold. It seemed as if a killing fest was about to begin. Han Ming'er did not put the bow down. She coldly watched Bar approach, and as she did, her bow gathered up more power. She was only a marquise, and Bar was a duke. But Bar was hostile to Han Sun, and so she wouldn't back down. Han Sun, tell her to stand down, a rebate duke next to Qing Li said. There is no need, Han Sun said coldly. The bow in Han Ming'er's hand was fully charged. Without a moment of hesitation she fired at Bar. The arrow had been created from a formless swirl of black smoke, and it became almost impossible to see as it flashed towards Bar. It flew near him, ready to perforate his heart. Everyone was shocked. They thought Han Ming'er was incredibly brave to take the first shot at Bar. The rebate dukes didn't dare say a single word though. They were afraid Bar would go crazy on them all. So, the duke pulled on Qing Li and the others to leave. They wanted to get as far away from Han Ming'er and Han Sun as possible, so they could avoid getting involved in their dispute. The destroyed stepped back even more as well. They were still smiling coldly. They looked at Han Ming'er, as if she was a dead woman. Bar was not only a cruel fellow, the others did not know much about him, but the destroyed most certainly did. He had been given the title of Born Destroyer by the leader of the destroyed himself. He was the strongest out of all of the destroyed. If Bar had been a pureblood destroyed, his talent would have most certainly given him the opportunity to become the next leader of the whole destroyed race. Although Bar had not received much support from the destroyed, he still did far better than most others of the destroyed, especially those of the same level as he was. And because he loved killing, his name was deeply associated with cruelty. He was also more famous than most kings of the destroyed because of all this too. Bar had once slain a dragon duke. Dragon 1 pursued him across a dozen systems in retaliation, but he managed to get away. While he was running away, he killed many dragon dukes and marquises too. That made the dragon look really bad, and it gave Bar's notoriety an enormous boost. Dragon 1 was a king, but he failed to chase down a duke, and Bar had killed many of the dragon. That was why he became famous. Bar saw Han Ming'er's arrow come right for him, but the speed he used to approach had not changed. He did not use the bone knife slung behind his shoulder. Instead, he reached out his hand to grab the arrow. Bar's hand came into contact with the tip of the arrow, and the expressions on Bar's faces hardened. A black light that looked indestructible cloaked his hand, and it looked like the arrow would shatter against it. That black arrow seemed to be sharper than expected though, and when the black arrow came against the black light, it did not break. Bar's power was unable to deflect it. The arrow flashed into Bar's hand like black lightning, and it spun as fast as a drill head. The black light broke, sending a flurry of sparks everywhere. Everyone watched as the arrowhead drilled into his hand, tearing through skin and bone. Blood spurted from the entry wound. The arrow had pierced right through Bar's hand, much to the utter disbelief of Qing Li, the destroyed, and the rebate that were watching. They stared as the arrow proceeded towards his heart. Dong! Bar fell backward and struck out with his bone knife. It hit the arrow, and made a very loud noise. Finally, however, he had managed to break the arrow. Just as everyone thought that was the end of the matter, they heard an explosion. The broken arrow exploded, becoming a black sun that swallowed Bar's body. When that scary power faded away, the black light went with it. Qing Li and the others could see that the bone armor Bar had worn was now all gone. His big body was exposed. But his body was heavily injured too. Blood was everywhere, and his bones and organs were clearly visible through his wounds. No one could believe a Marquise's arrow had just damaged Bar like that. Oh, so simply. How is that possible? This is Bar. The destroyed dukes were all in complete shock. Not even most dukes could have hurt Bar in that way. Qing Li and the rebate were in shock as well. They didn't expect this sort of result. They never thought Han Sen's faithful Marquise ally could wield such wicked strength. Han Sen was just as surprised as the others though. He hadn't expected Han Menger to be that strong. But he knew that was her talent and ability. Power like that at Marquise level was definitely competition with what Break Six Skies offered. Pure and utter devastation, when wrought like that, was incredibly scary. If Menger learned Break Six Skies, combining her power with the explosive abilities of that Geno art, how strong could she possibly get? Han Sen got excited as he thought about the prospect. This is amazing. The injured Bar looked very excited. He was still gripping his bone knife, and he now looked like a wolf that had found some prey. He began to shine red. Bar's wounds, as grievous as they were healing extremely quickly. The gashes on his body closed as they watched, and his power and presence were starting to erupt like a volcano. His black shadow loomed like a black beast. It was like the whole of the earth had been covered in the shadow of something terrifying. A roiling power was swallowing up the whole region. Han Menger did not move when faced with that presence though. She simply drew the string of her bow. Immediately after, a black arrow went soaring through the skies and headed for Bar. It was like a black thunderbolt going right for him. Bar's unnerving excitement hadn't diminished, and he started to dance as he swung his bone knife. His faces were filled with demonic joy as he tried to strike the arrow. But when the bone knife almost came into contact with the arrow behaved like magic. It vanished into thin air, and when it appeared once more, it was already at his chest. The diamond-like arrow tip started to shred the flesh of his torso. The black arrow pierced through his chest and punctured his heart. Stum! 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 An entire murder of black arrows soared through the skies at him, fast as lightning. Bar kept swinging his bone knife, but he was unable to break a single arrow. All of those arrows were like magic. Whenever Bar's bone knife was about to come into contact with an arrow, it would just disappear, and by the time it reappeared, it would already be digging into Bar's flesh. In a split second, Bar's body had been riddled with at least a dozen arrows. It was like he had been pierced by black thunderbolts. Qing Li and the others were all frozen. They couldn't believe the sight that their eyes were relaying to them. The destroyed marquises and dukes were all thinking to themselves, how is this possible? That is Bar. Boom! Han Menger, still holding her bow, fired another arrow at Bar. And when this one plunged into him, it exploded. It split into a number of black suns that quickly worked to ravage and shatter Bar's body. Dong! When that scary bone knife fell from the hands that clutched them, it struck a rock. It quivered in the rock at an angle, the hilt rising over Bar's shattered body. You couldn't find a single complete muscle from the messy slop that remained. This was a very shocking turn of events. Qing Li and the other rebates all stopped. They looked at Han Menger, who was standing in front of Han Senator. Her cold, but pretty face would forever be branded into their minds. Han Menger didn't rejoice though. She frowned and looked at Bar's bone knife. Suddenly, the scraps of flesh that remained began to move. The bits and pieces were all drawing together. Not long after, the flesh started to assemble itself and come together. The tom muscles and bones recomposed and rebuilt themselves. The figure of Bar was wholly reassembled. He looked like a doll that had been ripped apart, then sewn back together. There was still a number of seams across his body, of course. They looked like centipedes writhing over him. The scars disappeared quickly, and a living Bar stood before them once again. He picked up his bone knife, looked at Han Menger merrily and said, I haven't enjoyed a delicious fight such as this in a very long while. My stomach's already rumbling, you know. Feeling hungry is a wonderful feeling. Now, however, you are my prey. Tell me your name, so that I may remember and record the dish that you will become. The onlookers stared with open mouths. His body had been ripped apart, but then it had reassembled itself really quickly. Bar's power seemed to be stronger now too. Impossible. Impossible. The destroyed cannot heal themselves, can they? And no, that was far too incredible to be referred to simply as healing. It is as if he can actually revive himself. Qingli looked at Bar in sudden fear. That is why Bar is Bar. And this is only the beginning. The destroyed dukes laughed. Although Han Minger's power had been a surprise, they were still quite confident that Bar would be the victor. Bar might not have been a pureblood destroyed, but he was most certainly the strongest among them. Chapter 2176. Born killer Han Sun looked at Bar with surprise. Han Minger's power was undoubtedly the best out of all marquises. She was just as powerful as Han Sun when he used Break Six Skies. But even after being subjected to that massive amount of power, Bar was able to heal at an alarming speed. And on top of that, the life force inside his body became stronger. That had to be something more than a simple healing ability. It was obvious that Bar had a powerful body, and that must have been how he was able to survive Dragon One's pursuit as a duke. The guy's eyes looked menacing, as if killing was his only desire. What Bar saw now wasn't just prey. Han Sun knew the man before him loved nothing more than the pleasure of taking a life. A born killing machine, Han Sun thought. Bar's ugly face looked very excited. It was a rather twisted sight. He licked his lips while he stared at Han Minger. Slowly he started to approach her. The blood air of the bone knife spread out like a tide, and then rose up like black fire. It was wholly demonic. The scary presence of it began to spread and suffuse his body. Han Minger was going to raise her bow once again, but Han Sun stopped her with a hand. He smiled and said, "Let me do it. His body is weird, and I think we'll need something more than simple damage output to deal with him." Han Minger's strongest ability was the destructive arrow, but it had now been rendered useless against Bar. Han Sun didn't want her to take any more risks. When Han Minger relaxed her fingers, the bow disappeared. Then, she moved to position herself behind Han Senator. When Bar saw Han Sun step between Han Minger and himself, his face darkened. The bone knife in his hand lurched toward Han Sun, the knife's red power spreading like the abyss. "Get lost," he screamed. Bar's original target was supposed to be Han Sun, but he had now decided that Han Minger would be his prey. He wasn't interested in Han Sun anymore, and all he wanted to do now was slay Han Minger. He looked as if he had spent the last 3 days and nights hungry, deprived of food. And now, he had stumbled across a feast that was being taken away from him. There was no hitman more stubborn than Bar. Han Sun looked calm as he pulled out his ghost teeth knife and slashed in his opponent's direction. Dong! When the knives came against each other, the black blood and the purple air shattered. The blades hit each other with enough force to tear the fabric of space. And indeed, space really did break, cracks spreading from the impact like a spider web. The dark red and purple colors were lost in the chaos. Die! Bar's ugly faces looked more and more excited. The fire in his eyes was almost becoming something real. He looked at Han Sun and quickly waved his bone knife again. The dark beast's shadow appeared behind the oncoming strike. Bar's knife skills were very rough. There was no finesse or technique to his movements. There was nothing amazing about his skills, and he was a very different fighter than someone like Lone Bamboo. His knife skills were very rough, wild, violent, and flawed. He didn't care about the more granular details. His efforts were focused into brute force. Now, Han Sun knew why Bar was not born as a bona fide destroyed. It was like he was only there to destroy things. It was as if he didn't have any care for himself, and all he wished to do was wreck whatever got in his way. While knife skills like his were riddled with flaws, Bar did not care. He did not even try to fix them. He just wanted to kill whatever opponent he encountered. Kill! 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 The ugly face kept screaming, and it looked more and more creepy as time progressed. The bone knife was swinging wildly with the aim of consuming Han Sen's body. Catcha! Han Sen's ghost teeth knife slashed across Bar's chest. A deep red cut appeared, and blood and purple air began to leak from the seam. But Bar did not care. The wound did not slow down his assault. If anything, It made him look more excited than ever. Although the wound could not heal because it had been infused with teeth power, the attack wasn't strong enough to spread and tear up his body. The purple gash just remained where it was. Han Sun went on to deal another 10 of those attacks. They did not work well, and it seemed like Bar was getting as strong as the devil. And all he wanted was to see Han Sun dead. Dong! Ghost teeth knife. And the bone knife struck each other again. This time, though, Han Sun felt a powerful force come against him. He was sent flying 50 meters back through the air. In a few minutes, Bar's power had doubled. And furthermore, it was continuing to grow. The wounds weren't making him weaker. They were actually making him stronger. Han Sun is strong. He cannot be any weaker than Lone Bamboo. Ordinary dukes definitely couldn't beat him. It is just a shame that he has picked on the wrong enemy. Bar is a genuine killing machine. During a fight, he continues getting stronger until he can destroy his enemy. Even a king like Dragon One was unable to kill him. A destroyed duke looked at Han Sun and smiled confidently. Qingli observed Han Sun's situation, and she acknowledged that it wasn't going very well. She felt nervous and wondered out loud, what is Bar's body actually like? Why can teeth power not spread across him? Han Sun was also beginning to understand just how powerful Bar was. He knew that if he was to deal with an enemy, such as that, straight-up violence wouldn't be enough to take him down. Even teeth powers couldn't rip up Bar's body, and that spoke volumes about the man's talents. The more he fought, the stronger he was going to get. Seeing Bar holding his bone knife in front of him like some demon, Han Sun thought of something. Then he made a move. He dodged Bar's bone knife and put his ghost teeth knife away. A pair of pistols then appeared in his hands. Pang! Pang! 2 bullets thudded into Bar's chest. But at this point, the muscles had become too strong to penetrate. The bullets shattered the moment they came against the steel-like bands of Bar's chest. But those 2 bullets each left behind an image of a turtle. Bar tumbled to the ground, leaving a deep crater. Now he was many times slower. His body is strong, but he is not good at resisting debilitative effects. Turtle worked on him perfectly, Han Sun thought to himself. Seeing Bar's reduced speed, Qingli was very happy. She exclaimed, "It works. That must be the trick called turtle, which Han Sun himself created. It is so strong that it has actually managed to suppress Bar. If he thinks a sealing power is enough to defeat Bar, then he is very wrong." One of the Duke Destroyed snorted in disdain. "This is good. I am so excited. So much food for me." Bar's ugly faces devolved further and further into insanity. The cold face in the middle was suddenly starting to move. The eyes turned black and began to shine. Then Bar's body began to turn black. He was turning into dark steel. He was like a demon statue that had been forged from some ancient metal. The turtle spell, which had previously slowed him down, suddenly lost all effect. Bar's body was freed, and he flew up high. He slashed towards Han Sun with the power of a devil. Chapter 2177 Bar Han Sun moved like a shadow, and Bar's slashing bone knife was unable to strike him. Han Sun couldn't counter Bar's strength directly, so he had to remain fleet of foot. Even blocking one of those blows with his ghost teeth knife would damage him a great deal. Bar is getting stronger. Qingli had finally seen the problem that Han Sun was having. Bar's increase in strength was becoming obvious to all of the onlookers. And Han Sun's power remained what it was, not increasing at all. After the power increase, Han Sun was suppressed. All he could do was keep dodging. He couldn't fight Bar anymore. Qingli became very worried that there might not be a ceiling to Bar's increase of strength. Even if Han Sun used all of his power, if he couldn't avoid Bar's strikes, he could be killed in one shot. A destroyed duke laughed and said, "Bar is invincible against those who are of the same level as him. And Han Sun is only a marquise. He might be strong, but a marquise is just a marquise. He's offended Bar, so death is his fate now." Han Menger, Zero, and Little Angel were watching intently. They hadn't said a word thus far. It was usually a noisy affair when women got together, but the 3 of them weren't the fondest of speaking. So none of them said a word as they watched. Little Silver and Little Star were standing with them. They too watched quietly. Up! Han Sun suddenly leaped upwards and used his knife dip to press forward. A purple knife silk appeared in the air, thinner than a strand of hair. Bar was trapped and tangled up inside the knife silk. He was no longer able to move. Bar's fire was still growing. He looked at Han Sun with eyes full of rage. His motionless body began to expand. But he couldn't sever the incredibly soft yet durable knife silks. The knife silks dug into his flesh, making the man bleed profusely all over. Bar laughed. He cared nothing for the wounds he was incurring. He fought back with all his strength, laughing the entire time. And then there was a catch-up. He exerted too much strength, and the knife silks cut him to pieces. But a second later, those broken limbs were reconnected once more. Bar was standing again, and his body looked even scarier now. This guy is pretty hard to deal with. I could totally annihilate his body with super spank, but I really shouldn't use it with so many people watching. Han Sun frowned. His mind raced for a way to get rid of Bar. Bar was powerful, and the destroyed said Bar was the strongest duke. Han Sun did not believe the man was invincible though. Perhaps Bar was the best out of the destroyed. But Han Sun did not believe that any random genius in the Geno universe could overwhelm his power. Especially not someone who was a duke. The bodies of the dragon were strong and powerful. This was especially true of the king-class ones. Bar's body might have been powerful, but not to a degree that elicited fear. His power was limited, and that was why he had been forced to escape from Dragon 1. There was nothing to suggest he was actually invincible. Thank you, Bar crooned. Visit our Ellis novel. Com. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me enjoy such a delicious fight. The moment I kill you will be the best moment of my life. Bar was crazy. Every strike carried an endless murderous presence. Many black and red knife flames rose in the air, crossing over each other. Every scrape across the ground left behind a large knife mark. Bar's power and speed were better than any others of the same level. It was likely only a small handful of dukes that had what it took to fight him now. So strong. Han Sun complimented his enemy. He also had to admit that if he did not make use of super spank, defeating his opponent would be impossible until he was a duke. Blowing him into pieces via break 6 skies would be a futile endeavor as well. The enemy would survive and end up even stronger. By the way Bar was getting stronger, Han Sun could guess that Bar was using his own injuries for power. The harder Han Sun struck him, the stronger he became. But he could also tell that the power Bar had absorbed from him wasn't permanent. If it was permanent, Bar wouldn't have been damaged so easily upon their first encounter. When he first saw Bar, Han Sun noticed that his power was not all that higher than the average duke. He was nothing special amongst them. But right now, Bar was ranking amongst the best of the dukes. To continue fighting this way would only give him even more strength. It is useless. No matter how hard he tries, Han Sun is going to die. Many of the destroyed were smiling. If Bar could kill Han Sun, it'd be a notable boost for the destroyed. Han Sun could not kill his enemy, and neither could he risk injuring him. He was getting pretty desperate. Die! Bar's bone knife kept on swinging. The power it carried was enough to sunder mountains. It struck Han Sen's head. The bone knife met no resistance, and it went clean through Han Sen's head. Then, Han Sen's body exploded like a water balloon. It was another one of his moon doppelgangers. The real Han Sun was now standing right next to Bar. His hair was close enough to touch Bar's face. Han Sun smiled at Bar, and he said, "You are strong. Unreasonably strong. I cannot kill you. But of course I am going to kill you." Bar swung his knife with the aim of cutting Han Sun in half. Han Sun moved as smoothly as the wind, while Bar's bone knife whistled through the air after him. But there was still a distance between the knife and Han's senator. It felt as if some invisible waves were enabling Han Sun to evade the bone knife. "I cannot kill you, but I can still beat you." Han Sun laughed. "I think he is crazy. If he cannot kill Bar, then how can he defeat him?" A destroyed duke grunted repeatedly. As this was happening, Han Sun raised a pistol with the word spell scrawled across it. He aimed it at Bar's body and pulled the trigger. Pang! A bullet whizzed out of the gun and struck Bar's forehead. The bullet hit Bar's forehead and disintegrated into dust. It left a red mark and a spell behind. This skill again? I have told you already, and I can tell you again. Your sealing powers won't work on me while I have my chaos powers. Bar looked at his foe with disdain and roared. He used his knife to try to attack Han Sun again. But after he brought his knife up, his faces went blank. A light sheet of ice began to seep from his forehead, and it started to spread across his entire body. Before he could wipe it away, his body was completely frozen. He looked like an ice statue, sculpted into the shape of a person about to strike. Chapter 2178 Frozen Bar. The destroyed dukes saw Han Sun use an icy force to freeze Bar on the spot. One of the dukes looked on Han Sun with a sneer. Ice powers are worthless against the real might of Bar. His power is evil. He has a body of chaos and a spirit of disaster. An ordinary destroyed has 3 special talents. We can wield light, dark, and chaos powers. Bar's power is different, however, due to the mixed blood in his veins. He has 3 amazing talents. He can use the evil power to kill. He can use the body of chaos to disturb things. And he can use his spirit of disaster, which is a mysterious power even to us. Each of them possesses incredible power, and together, they make Bar practically invincible. The destroyed Duke coldly laughed and said, "Cold powers will not work on Bar. They will only end up making him even stronger. Let's see what happens, shall we? Bar will break the ice very soon." It looked as if Bar was answering his words, for a squeaking noise began to come from his frozen form. It sounded like glass cracking under pressure. That is a powerful body. Even my upgraded cold powers from Jade Skin can't freeze him effectively. Han Sun complimented his enemy. But Han Sun was aware that if he had used his Jade Skin Godlight in the beginning, Bar would have been unable to escape. Bar was now bursting with power because of their long, protracted fight. It had allowed Bar's power gain to build up a ton of momentum. If Han Sun had tried this sooner, Bar wouldn't have been able to break free from the Jade Skin Godlight's freezing power. Luckily, Han Sun wasn't depending on the Jade Skin Godlight to freeze Bar. His other hand was holding a pistol. He lifted it and fired at Bar. A bullet with an ice light was fired. It hit Bar's frozen body, and the Jade Skin Godlight froze Bar once again. But this bullet was different from the one with the earlier Jade Skin Godlight. This bullet was equipped with a strange and hidden symbol. When Spell reached Marquise, a weird symbol began to appear on her ammunition. Its design reflected the symbol on Spell's forehead. It was imbued with the power Spell obtained when she became a Marquise. It is useless. No matter how much he tries to freeze Bar, it is all for naught. Doing this will only boost Bar's resistance to the ice powers. Does Han Sun have a death wish? The destroyed Duke grinned haughtily. After firing, Han Sun blew across the barrel of the pistol. He put the pistol away and turned around to look at Han Menger. With a shrug of his shoulders he said, "Let's go. This guy is too difficult to fight. I am unable to kill him." Visit our Ellis novel. Han Menger and Zero had no opinion of their own, so they were swift to follow Han Sun's decision. A destroyed Duke loudly said, "Han Sun, there is no point in running. Bar is going to break that ice power. You cannot run. Once Bar has made you his target, there is no escape." Pang! Han Sun didn't turn around. He simply drew his gun and fired a bullet at that Duke. The destroyed Duke's face went white, and it was too late for him to dodge. The 3 heads shouted, while the 6 arms wielded 3 different orbs of light in a bid to deflect that incoming bullet. Pang! The tricolored godlight hit the bullet, and the bullet exploded. A mushroom cloud rose from that spot, turning the place where the destroyed Duke had stood into a small crater. The entire team was blown up into a bloody mess that painted the region. The destroyed Duke up front was nothing but bits. There were 2 destroyed Dukes a little away from the group. They weren't killed in an instant, but they were left to bleed out. Death would come for them soon enough. They lay writhing on the ground, looking up at Han Sun in horror. "You guys aren't Bar, so don't talk crap to me." Han Sun put his pistol away and left the area with his companions. Qing Li and the other rebate were paralyzed on the spot. They knew Han Sun was strong, but they did not know he was that strong. He was only a Marquise, but in a split second, he had wiped out an entire group of Dukes with a single attack. That level of power was scary to behold. No wonder he shared the same name as Lone Bamboo. That is way too frightening. Qing Li's pretty eyes looked upon him with complete admiration. In her heart she was thinking, should I keep begging him to be my teacher? Perhaps he should be my teacher instead of Knife Queen. But he already rejected me once before. Now he definitely won't accept me. Bar will kill you. Kill you, wheezed the two dying destroyed. Blood was drooling out of their mouths. They knew they weren't going to live long, so they put their hopes of vengeance on Bar. They hoped Bar would be able to break the ice and kill Han Senator. They looked upon the frozen Bar with excitement, hoping to see Bar burst free before they passed. They imagined Han's son then being killed by Bar. It made their dying bodies grasp a smidgen of power to stay alive just a little bit longer. But Han's son and the others were already leaving, and the frozen Bar had yet to move. He was still holding the bone knife, and he was facing down like a frozen statue. Impossible. How can that ice freeze chaos power? Impossible. Bar must be able to break the ice. He just needs a bit of time. The destroyed thought desperately. Han's son and the others left the area. Bar was still frozen on the spot, not moving. At first, the destroyed were optimistic. Then they were disappointed. And lastly, they looked to be drained of all hope. Their final breaths were spent staring at the frozen Bar. They did not close their eyes, but even so Bar remained frozen. He did not move. Other elites soon came walking by. And when they saw the frozen Bar, they were stunned. When they realized Bar had been frozen by Han's son, they were even more shocked. Bar was an infamous duke, so it was hard to imagine how a marquise had managed to trap him like that. The destroyed nobles eventually came and took the frozen Bar away, but it was several hours before they arrived. This was the first time Han's son had used spell, while it operated with the power of a marquise. He did not know what the new power was called, but that symbol had a strange power that would not fade away. So Han's son called it eternity. Han's son only wanted to freeze his foe for a while, so he could buy them enough time to vacate the area. Han's son did not expect the eternity effects to be so strong. A few hours later, Bar was still frozen. Chapter 2179 I'll Eat You. Han's son and his group traveled across a number of mountains and swamps. He was able to find a few xenogeneic corpses, but he couldn't find a single one that was still alive. They couldn't find any Duke xenogeneics, and not even any low-level ones either. Why are there so many people taking advantage of a time like this? Han's son felt depressed. But with the way things were going, he realized there was nothing he'd be able to do about it. He decided to leave planet Sodi. But suddenly, many Duke elites began to descend from space. Seeing the skies fill with spaceships and elites coming to planet Sodi, Han's son raised his eyebrows. Had they not been flying in a number of different directions, Han's son might have believed they were coming for him. Planet Sodi is under lockdown. Please do not try to leave the surface. An announcement was aired through the skies. Battleships and airships all sat in a gridlock over planet Sodi. Even space fortresses were kept in the orbit of the planet. Weapons were aimed at planet Sodi from every direction as well. If they all fired their weapons, planet Sodi would have been reduced to space rubble 10 times over. Many small aircraft flew out of the greater battleships, and they all seemed to be heading down towards planet Sodi. Han's son was shocked, and he wished to know what was going on. That destroyed traitor cannot be on planet Sodi, can he? If he is, then he must be a very brave fellow. He might have been hiding in plain sight, but it appears someone has exposed him. Han's son could not think of any more potential explanations for the current scenario. But still he was just guessing. Nothing was confirmed yet. Han's son would know soon enough if the traitor was there though. That much he was sure of. The whole of planet Sodi was locked down. It was impossible for Han's son and the others to leave the planet now. All the battleships and space fortresses were put into combat mode. If Han's son's group forced their way out, they'd surely be attacked. This was a territory belonging to the rebate, so at least Han's son was a part of them. There was no need for him to try to run. So, Han's son took Han Menger and the others to the only city that existed on planet Sodi. It was called Steel City. Han's son was something of a VIP amongst the rebate. When he entered Steel City, the workers there gave him a glowing reception. They heartily invited him in and gave him a room at the most luxurious hotel in town. I hope the lockdown doesn't last too long. I don't want to be late when I am supposed to guard the door. Han Sen didn't think it would take too long though. They had locked down the planet with a large host of dukes and marquises. It would be impossible for the marquis they sought to escape them. But 2 days went by, and those enforcing the lockdown still hadn't found the traitor. Han Sen frowned. There were so many dukes and marquises there. The entirety of planet Sodi had to have been searched from top to bottom by now. Despite their exploration of every nook and cranny, the destroyed traitor had eluded capture. There were only 2 possible explanations for this. Firstly, they might have been working on incorrect intel. Perhaps the traitor wasn't even on planet Sodi, and that was why they were having trouble locating him. The second possibility was that the destroyed traitor wasn't actually hiding. Perhaps he really was walking around in plain sight, but he had changed his appearance. And as a result, nobody recognized him. Han Sen didn't think the first possibility was correct. If they hadn't been able to confirm that this was precisely where the destroyed traitor was, there was no way they would have blanketed the sky with such a dramatic show of force. Apparently, the authorities were confident in their intel. The traitor was most likely there. If he really has disguised his identity, that is very bad news. There are so many marquises here on this planet. They cannot check everyone, and so if that is the case, they will be unable to find him. Han Sen was worried that it might take too long for him to return to Cold Palace in time. Han Sen and Han Ming'er and the others were all merrily eating in the hotel lobby. Eventually, Han Sen detected a certain presence that was familiar to him. He lifted his head to take a look, and there he saw that same extreme king woman he had encountered before. She hadn't left the territory of the rebate yet. And on top of that, she had come to the 6-star Xenogenic space. She must have also been looking for the stolen treasure of the destroyed. What could he have stolen, I wonder? It has even prompted the people of Extreme King to come out in search of it. Han Sen was shocked. The Extreme King woman saw Han Sen, but she pretended that she hadn't. She walked right past Han Sen and sat near the window. Han Sen didn't concern himself with her too much. If she wanted to ignore him, then he figured there was little point in him approaching her. He might find himself asking for trouble. Not long after, Han Sen saw many different races coming into the restaurant. Many of the elites that were out in search of the traitor had come to Steel City. They realized the problem now. The destroyed traitor was no longer hiding. The traitor had changed their identity, and now no one knew who it might have been. A few Buddha came into the restaurant. One marquis in particular came up to Han Sen and bowed before him. Amitabha, Mr. Han, thank you for saving me. Han Sen remembered that Buddha as one of the marquises he saved in Metal World. He hadn't learned the man's name, however. You are welcome, but I was just trying to save myself, Han Sen responded quietly. When Han Sen and that marquis Buddha spoke, many marquises and dukes heard them and approached. Khan was amongst them. When he saw Han Sen, he smiled and sat down next to him. Brother Han, how much of a coincidence is this? We have met once again. I have heard that you froze Bar. That is very scary. You becoming a marquis was a little late, wasn't it? If you were marquis a little earlier, I bet that dollar would have met his match against you. You should have been the first name on the Geno being scroll. Khan had turned into a rather obnoxious bootlicker. All of the elites looked over to Han Sen with a mixture of complicated expressions. Han Sen ignored Khan's praise. That guy was like a cockroach, and he never died. Although Khan was just a marquis, Han Sen had tried to kill his giant golem body twice and failed. Khan was still alive, and everywhere Han Sen went, he kept bumping into the annoying man. Ha! Khan grunted, and his face went a little pale. That was because a large man had walked into the establishment, clutching a bone knife. Han Sen turned his head. Bar stood there, holding his bone knife. The freeze effect had vanished. Bar's appearance made the whole lobby stop. That cruel man would kill anyone anywhere. He had no concern for law or morals. Khan saw Bar approach, and so he stood up. He forced a smile at Han Sen and said, "Talk soon." After that, Khan returned to the table he was at earlier with the rest of his demon fellows. Bar came in front of Han Sen and said coldly, "I'll eat you." After that, he did not wait for Han Sen's response. He walked to another table and thrust the bone knife into the ground. He sat there and looked at Han Sen without blinking. Han Sen knew Bar hadn't found a way to defrost fully. If he had, the monster would have struck Han Sen without speaking. No one knew what was going on, but there were many dukes and marquises there. Droves of them filled the lobby. "Can I sit here?" asked a voice near Han Sr. Chapter 2180. Gathering up in the lobby, Han Sen raised his head and saw a feather woman standing beside him. She had blue eyes and blonde hair. Her snow-white wings were very attractive, and the gorgeous curves of her body were difficult to look away from. Han Sen looked around and noticed that all the tables were taken. There weren't many empty seats in the establishment. Bar was occupying a table all by his lonesome, but no one wished to sit with him. "As you please," Han Sen said casually. Then he proceeded to ignore the feather woman's presence as he went back to scoffing down his meal. Something seemed to be very wrong. The atmosphere of the place held a subtle tension, and he had the sneaking suspicion that something awry was on the verge of happening. He planned to stay there and watch whatever event was about to unfold. The feather woman ordered something to eat, but she didn't talk much. She just sat where she was quietly, and when the meal came, she began eating without making a sound. Many creatures came into the restaurant, but there were no more tables for them. They filtered through the building, looking for a spot to sit near someone else of the same race. When someone couldn't find a seat, they stood by the wall instead of leaving. Finally, a duke with the head of a bull arrived. He and a few of his kind moved over to the extreme king woman's table. They didn't say anything, and they just reached for chairs. Han Sen knew that what happened next would be entertaining. "Get lost," the extreme king woman barked before the bull-headed men had settled themselves. "Young one, don't be so cocky. That won't turn out well for you." The bull-headed duke looked on her coldly. He had no intention of heeding the extreme king's warning. He smiled as he pulled out a seat for himself. "Damn it," Han Sen sighed. He knew those bull-headed people were brainless. Even if the duke didn't know that she belonged to extreme king, he should have known something was off when he saw one woman sitting by herself, while every other table was packed to the gills with other people. And on top of asking for a seat, he dared to provoke her with harsh words. As the bull-headed duke sat down, the woman moved her arm. Before the bull-headed man realized what had happened, he had been sent flying. Pang! The duke's airborne flight sent him crashing through a wall. He flew out of the hotel's restaurant and skidded across the ground. He struggled to get back to his feet, and blood spilled out of his mouth. Everyone looked at the extreme king woman in shock. The other bull-headed men in her proximity lurched back in fright, then started to run off. They picked up the injured bull-headed duke and fled without saying a word. Although the bull-headed duke was not a real elite, a minor slap from the woman had almost killed him. She obviously possessed a disturbing amount of power. Qingli sat down and quietly told Han Sen, "Right now, every race is thinking that the traitor is hiding someplace in Steel City. They are checking around everywhere in the hopes of finding him. The bullheads and the destroyed seem to have a connection too. If I am guessing correctly, they were sent here to test that woman. No one expected the woman to be so strong, and so they're wondering if she is the traitor." "Do you know where the traitor comes from?" Han Sen asked. Qingli thought for a moment. "The one that betrayed the destroyed isn't actually one of the destroyed himself. He was an outsider that joined them. The destroyed did not say which race the person belongs to, so we have no clue who it might be. According to our investigation, the traitor's race has yet to be determined, and there's a good chance that the traitor can shapeshift into any race." After that, Qingli looked at the feather woman. Her eyes narrowed slightly in suspicion. Han Sen nodded and asked, "Do you know what treasure the traitor stole?" Qingli nodded and said, "There is some news, but I'm not sure whether or not it is the truth. It looks like the traitor stole a deified treasure called the Destroyed Bible. That is why the destroyed are so on edge. They really need to find that traitor and reclaim the Destroyed Bible. All the races are looking for the treasure as well, That is why the situation has become so complicated. Where did this nugget of information come from? Han Sen looked at her queerly. No one knows the original source, but the topic is being discussed everywhere. Qingli looked confused, and then she went on to ask Han Sen, "Do you think it isn't true?" Han Sen shrugged. "I'm just wondering. Maybe the traitor released the news himself, hoping to stir up all this chaos. That might be the way he has managed to survive. Otherwise, something so secretive wouldn't have spread so quickly. This is just a guess, of course. I don't really know much of anything." Han Sen paused, and then went on to ask, "What is the destroyed Bible? It sounds like a genoart. Why is it considered a treasure instead?" Qingli looked at Han Sen in surprise. "You've never heard of the destroyed Bible? It's a destroyed treasure. The story goes that when the destroyed Alpha died, his xenogenic gene became a deified treasure. And it also contains the destroyed Alpha's powers. Inheriting that power is very difficult, however. No one can really understand it, so they can't make use of the destroyed Bible's power. Even so, the destroyed Bible is still their most important treasure. They cherish it because it represents their race as a whole. So the destroyed really want the destroyed Bible back. They won't allow any other race to take it." Han Sen didn't speak, but to himself he was thinking, a deified treasure sounds valuable indeed, especially if it carries the power of a destroyed Alpha. It is no wonder that everyone seems to be after it. Even I fancy poking around for it now. But with that being said, anyone who takes it would find much ire directed at them by the destroyed. Han Sen noticed that the destroyed marquises and dukes were staring at Zero, Han Menger, Little Angel, and the Feather Woman. Their eyes were intent. Han Sen's heart jumped, and he thought to himself, did they find out that the traitor that stole the destroyed Bible was not a man, but in fact a woman? And then, Han Sen looked at the Feather Woman. If the traitor was a woman, then the Feather Woman really did seem suspicious. She was all alone after all. As he looked at her, Han Sen became more and more intrigued. The woman's presence seemed like an ordinary feather marquise on the surface, but when Han Sen scanned her with his Dongxian aura, her aura seemed like nothing more than a disguise. That woman's presence actually ran really deep. It possessed a depth Han Sen's Dongxian aura could not even reach. Is she the real traitor of the destroyed? Han Sen guessed. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.